The streetlights along Cedar Avenue flickered as I drove home that October evening. The town of Glenwood was small, American Midwest, quiet, safe, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I had just moved into a modest rental house near the edge of town, an old brick structure from the 1920s. Cheap rent and character, as the realtor had said. I had grown up in cities where nothing ever felt safe, so a small town with charm was a welcome change. But that night, as I pulled into the driveway, the shadows around the house felt deeper than usual, almost alive, and a chill ran down my spine despite the warm autumn air. The first week in the house was uneventful. I unpacked, set up my room, and tried to settle in. The house had its quirks. Floorboards creaked, the furnace made noises like a groaning animal, and the basement smelled faintly of mildew. But nothing I couldn't handle. I liked that it felt a little off. It gave the place personality. Then I noticed it. Small things at first. A drawer left open that I was certain I had closed, a kitchen towel moved from the counter to the sink, faint scratches on the hardwood floor that didn't make sense. I chalked it up to old house quirks and my own exhaustion. Halloween was approaching and the town was gearing up. Kids ran past the house, costumes rustling, pumpkins lined the porches, and the air smelled of candy corn and damp leaves. I decided to leave a few decorations up outside to feel a little festive. Nothing crazy, just some fake cobwebs, a jack-o'-lantern or two, a string of orange lights around the porch. But I didn't expect what came next. It started on the evening of October 26th. I was in the living room scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint knock at the front door. Odd, since I wasn't expecting anyone and the street was quiet. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door, fully expecting a trick-or-treater, but the porch was empty. I shrugged and closed it. Moments later, I heard a soft, dragging sound behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, I set up my laptop in the living room to watch a movie. Around 11 p.m., the lights flickered, then went out. I cursed under my breath and grabbed a flashlight. When I shined it around, I saw faint footprints on the carpet leading from the hallway to the kitchen. I froze. I live alone. My heart pounded. The footprints stopped near the kitchen sink, damp spots visible on the tiles. I called my friend Mark, who had moved into town years ago, and told him what happened. He laughed nervously, suggesting I probably left the window open or imagined it. But the unease in his laugh matched my own feelings. The next night, I decided to lock myself in my bedroom and try to sleep. The house was silent, save for the hum of the furnace. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate, measured. I grabbed my baseball bat and swung the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the air felt thick, oppressive. I felt like something was watching me, something that didn't belong. That morning, I found faint scratches along the wall outside my bedroom. They hadn't been there the night before. Over the next couple of days, the incidents escalated. I began to see shadows, just in the corner of my eye at first, fleeting, barely there. But soon, they became more defined, lingering, moving independently of any light source. Objects began to move. The kitchen knife left on the counter would appear on the floor, a chair would be tipped over, a book would fall from the shelf. I started recording the house with my phone, setting it up on the counter in the living room and basement, hoping to catch something on video. On October 30th, I watched the footage from the night before. The living room was empty as expected until around 1:47 a.m. A figure appeared, tall, dark, almost a silhouette, gliding across the room. Its head tilted unnaturally, almost as if it were looking right at me, and the shadows around it flickered. The figure stopped for a moment, then slowly turned and walked toward the basement door. I could hear it whisper something, garbled, but distinct enough to send chills down my spine. I replayed it several times, and each time I thought I saw its mouth move. I couldn't make out words, but the sound in the recording was a low, rasping voice. Halloween night came, and I was a wreck. I didn't answer the door for trick-or-treaters. The streets were alive with laughter and costumes, but I stayed inside, curtains drawn, lights on. At 11:13 p.m., I heard it, the knock. Heavy, deliberate, echoing through the house. I didn't look through the peephole. I knew who it was. I grabbed my bat, my phone, everything I could hold, and locked every door. The knocking continued for hours, always at irregular intervals, like a heartbeat, growing louder and softer, closer and further away. Then it stopped. The silence was suffocating. Around 2 a.m., I ventured into the living room. The lights flickered, and I noticed the jack-o'-lantern I had left outside was now inside, on the coffee table, its candle lit, though I hadn't moved it. The flame flickered violently, casting shadows that danced on the walls. I backed away slowly, but the air grew cold, my breath visible in the dim light. I heard a whisper, clear this time. "You shouldn't be here." I left the house that night, driving around until dawn, unsure of where I was going or what I was hoping to find. When I returned, everything was in its original place. The jack-o'-lantern was back on the porch, the furniture untouched, but the sense of being watched remained. I stayed up, lights blazing, every sound making me jump. The house felt alive, aware, malevolent. Over the next few days, I contacted the previous tenants and neighbors. I learned that the house had a dark history. The man who built it in the 1920s was obsessed with Halloween and practiced strange, private rituals. He had died under mysterious circumstances, officially a heart attack, but locals whispered about rituals gone wrong and unnatural events leading up to his death. They said he had been seen walking the halls at night, a pale figure with sunken eyes and a black cloak. The more I learned, the more I realized that what I was experiencing wasn't unique to me. The house carried the weight of its history, and perhaps the spirit of its original owner lingered still, drawn to the energy of Halloween. The following year, I tried to avoid the house, moving to a different town. But each October I feel it, the weight in the air, the shadow at the corner of my vision, the whisper of my name. Friends have come over during Halloween night trying to see for themselves, but they report strange things too. Lights flicker, objects move, a coldness that seeps into your bones. One friend swears she saw a figure at the window, pale, black-cloaked, staring at us silently. I've come to understand something horrifying. Halloween is when the house and whatever haunts it becomes most active. It's drawn to fear, to attention, to life. The shadow returns each year, patient, waiting. And now, after all these years, I've realized there's no escaping it. Wherever I live, whenever October rolls around, I feel its presence, lingering just out of reach, whispering, reminding me that the night belongs to it. I keep my doors locked, my windows closed, and lights on, but I know it doesn't matter. It finds a way in. Every Halloween, I hear the knocking, feel the cold, see the shadows that shouldn't exist, and I know that one day I'll open my eyes and it will be there, standing at the end of the hallway, as it has for generations. The Halloween man doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive, and he always returns. I haven't lived in Glenwood for years now, but every October, the dreams start. Shadows moving in my bedroom, whispers just beneath hearing, the faint smell of burning leaves, and a chill that settles in my chest. I wake up to see dark shapes lingering at the foot of my bed. Sometimes I reach for the light, and sometimes I don't even bother. Because I know. I know that when Halloween comes, he will come too, no matter where I am. And all the safety I cling to, all the locks and doors, mean nothing. He is patient. He is inevitable. The first time I saw him, I thought I could explain it away. The second time, I began to doubt my sanity. Now, years later, I know better. He is real, and he is waiting. Waiting for the fear, waiting for the attention, waiting for me to be alone. Every October, the knocking begins. Every October, the shadows move. And every October, I remember the first time he stood in my hallway, black cloak trailing, eyes sunken, mouth whispering words I can never forget. "You belong here now." I've tried to tell people, friends, strangers online, anyone who will listen. They laugh, they shake their heads, or they simply change the subject. But those who live in older houses, who've experienced Halloween in quiet towns, sometimes nod knowingly. They don't need me to explain. They've seen him too, and they know. The stories are always the same. A figure at the window, a knock at the door, shadows that move when no one is there. The smell of decay, the whisper in the dark, the chill that refuses to leave. Some say he's the original owner, some say he's something older, something that doesn't belong in this world. I've learned it doesn't matter. I am careful now, every October, every night. I keep candles and salt in the corners of the rooms, lights on timers, a bell near every window. I try to make noise, to make life, to make my presence known so he doesn't see me as easy prey. But deep down, I know it is only a matter of time. Halloween comes every year without fail, and with it, he returns. Always, he returns. Story the end. It started on a crisp October evening in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where Halloween was more than just a holiday. It was an event. Families spent weeks decorating, pumpkins sat on every porch, and the streets were alive with kids running from house to house, candy buckets swinging wildly in their hands. I was 17 that year, home alone while my parents volunteered at the town's haunted hayride, and I had been entrusted with keeping an eye on my younger cousin, Lily, who was 9. We had spent the afternoon carving pumpkins, the smell of pumpkin guts and candle smoke filling the kitchen. Lily was dressed as a fairy, complete with glittery wings that constantly flapped as she ran around the living room, and I wore a simple black hoodie and jeans, feeling more like the responsible older cousin than my usual lazy self. When the sun started to set, the glow of the streetlights mixed with the orange and purple hues from the decorations made the neighborhood look like something out of a dream or a nightmare. Around 7 o'clock, Lily insisted on going out for a short walk to see the decorations on the next street over, and I agreed, making her promise to stay right next to me. We didn't take the main streets. Instead, we walked down a narrow, winding road that cut through a part of the neighborhood that had been abandoned for years. Houses were boarded up, paint peeled like sunburned skin, and weeds grew taller than the mailboxes. It was the kind of place that had been left behind when the town moved on, and most families avoided it entirely. As we walked, I noticed movement up ahead. At first, I thought it was a stray cat, but the figure was too large, too human. A man stood in front of one of the abandoned houses. His clothes were strange, an old wrinkled suit that looked decades out of date, and his posture was perfectly straight. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes caught the dim streetlight in a way that made them glint unnaturally. And then there was the smile. It wasn't friendly. It was wide, unnatural, as though it had been carved onto his face and held there permanently. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the chill creeping up my spine. The man didn't respond at first. He just stood there, completely still, watching us. Lily grabbed my hand and squeezed it tightly. I noticed then that she had gone quiet, the excitement of Halloween draining from her expression and replaced with a tense apprehension. "Do you like games?" the man finally asked. His voice was low and calm, but it carried a strange weight, as though it resonated somewhere beneath the normal plane of sound. I frowned. "Games? What kind of games?" He tilted his head, slowly, unnaturally, like a doll wound too tight. "A special kind, one that only a few people ever get to play." I stepped closer, instinctively shielding Lily behind me. "We don't play games with strangers." His smile widened. But you're brave, aren't you? So young, yet so fearless." He took a single step toward us, and I realized his shoes made no sound at all. He was closer now, and yet it felt like the shadows around him swallowed any noise. "Let's go, Lily," I whispered, tugging her hand. The man didn't move. "You can leave if you like. But the game, it has already begun." I didn't argue. I turned down another street, dragging Lily behind me. But the neighborhood didn't seem right anymore. The houses we had passed earlier, full of lights and life, were gone. In their place were empty lots, thick shadows, and the faint rustle of leaves that didn't belong to any wind. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of my eyes, the way the fading light blended with the darkness, but my heart pounded anyway. Then I saw it. A small figure standing at the intersection ahead. A boy, probably around 8 years old, wearing a costume that looked like it had been torn and dirtied over decades. His face was shadowed, but I felt its gaze on me, and it made my stomach twist. The boy started to move, gliding across the cracked pavement in a way that didn't seem physically possible. Each step was smooth, silent, wrong. Lily whimpered and pressed against me. "Cousin, why is he like that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I knew was that we had to get out of there, away from whatever this was. I grabbed Lily's hand and started running, but the streets seemed endless, twisting in ways that didn't match the map in my mind. Every turn brought more darkness, more silence. The usual sounds of Halloween, laughter, barking dogs, music from speakers, were gone. Behind us, I could hear the man's voice echoing, though he was nowhere near close enough for sound to carry like that. Run if you like, but you cannot escape the game. I glanced back and caught sight of the boy again, gliding closer, following us. His movements were unnatural, fluid, almost like he was underwater. I screamed, and Lily screamed too. I tried to hold onto her hand, but the fear made my fingers fumble, slip. We stumbled into what I thought was a familiar street, lined with houses that looked normal. Porch lights flickered on, kids ran past us with their candy buckets, and I felt a momentary relief wash over me. We were safe. We were back in reality. Then I saw him again. The man, standing at the far end of the street, motionless. His smile was wider now, stretched impossibly across his face. Behind him, the boy hovered at the edge of the shadows, just watching. I told myself it was over. I took Lily by the hand and ran the rest of the way home, bolting the door behind us. My parents didn't get home until nearly midnight, and by the time they returned, I was shaking and unable to explain what had happened without sounding insane. The next morning, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. On the front porch, 3 small pumpkins had appeared overnight. They weren't carved or decorated, they were just there. Inside each pumpkin was a small black stone, smooth and cold. I picked one up and felt a faint pulse, like a heartbeat. Lily refused to touch them. I didn't either. I put them in the garage and locked the door. I tried to tell anyone about what had happened. Friends, neighbors, even my parents when I finally worked up the courage. No one believed me. They assumed it was a trick of the imagination or that my fear had made me exaggerate. But I knew the truth. I had seen something that Halloween that wasn't human. Something that existed just out of reach of our world. Something that watched and waited for the right moment to strike. Over the years, I moved several times, trying to put the memory behind me. But every Halloween, I felt a shiver run down my spine, and my thoughts inevitably returned to that narrow road, the man in the black suit, and the boy with the gliding steps. Each year, I would check my doors, my windows, and even the shadows in my room, imagining them standing there, waiting. Then, a few years ago, I got a call from a friend who still lived in that town. He told me about a family that had moved into the old neighborhood, into a house I recognized as one of the ones we had passed on that night. A little boy had disappeared while trick-or-treating, last seen running down the narrow road. No one could find him. No one could explain what happened. I didn't answer the phone for a while. When I finally did, I just listened to him tell me the story, my stomach twisting into knots. The voice at the end of the line was full of fear, the kind of fear that makes your chest tight and your hands tremble. I realized then that whatever I had seen that night hadn't just been a figment of imagination. It hadn't just been me, Lily, and the darkness. It had been real. And it was still out there, waiting for the next person to play the game. Since then, I've never walked outside alone on Halloween. I never take shortcuts through empty streets, never pass by abandoned houses, and I never ignore the small, subtle signs that something is watching. Sometimes I dream of that man, standing perfectly still at the end of a shadowed street, smiling that impossible smile. Sometimes I hear the whisper of a small boy's voice calling my name in the dead of night, and I know with every ounce of certainty I have that the game never really ends. That man, that boy, the black stones, the quiet streets, they are all part of something that exists just beyond the edge of our reality, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to enter. Last Halloween, I drove through a different town, trying to avoid the memories that always came with the season. But as I passed an abandoned house, I saw him. That same pale man in the black suit standing in the yard, motionless. Behind him, a shadowy figure of a boy gliding silently across the cracked pavement. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept driving, heart hammering, praying that the distance between us was enough to keep me safe. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up to the faintest sound of footsteps outside my window, soft and deliberate. I tell myself it's nothing, just the wind or a neighbor or a cat, but deep down I know better. I know that somewhere out there the game is waiting, and if I ever let my guard down, I know he'll be there, smiling that impossible smile and asking me once again, "Do you want to play?" I don't. Story the end. It was the Halloween of 2019 in a quiet suburban neighborhood in northern Ohio. The kind of place where people still left candy bowls on their porches and trusted kids to take just one. The trees had already lost most of their leaves, and the streets were layered in damp orange and brown, illuminated by porch lights and flickering jack-o'-lanterns. The air had that sharp, cold smell that always came right before November. Everyone in the neighborhood knew each other, at least well enough to wave when they passed by, but there was one house that stood out. It wasn't run down or haunted looking like in movies. It was just empty. The Walker House. It had been that way for almost 5 years. The realtor's sign had long faded, the windows were dusty, and the curtains never moved. Kids made up stories about it. Some said an old man had died inside. Others said it was haunted by someone who went missing on Halloween night years ago. When my friends and I were seniors in high school, that house became the dare spot. You weren't really part of the group until you'd spent at least 5 minutes on the Walker porch after dark. That year, though, someone wanted to up the ante. It started at a Halloween party at Ethan's house. Everyone was dressed up, cheap costumes, loud music, lights strung across the yard. I wasn't planning to stay long. I was never the party type. But when Ethan came over with that smirk he always had when he was about to suggest something stupid, I knew I'd end up involved. "Dude," he said, pulling me aside, "we're doing something way better than bobbing for apples." He gestured toward the back of the yard where a few people were huddled, Maddie, her boyfriend Chris, and 2 others I didn't recognize. "What?" I asked. "You know the Walker place?" "We're going in tonight," I laughed, thinking he was joking, but the look on his face said otherwise. "You're serious?" "Yeah, man. No one's been inside in years. It's Halloween. It's perfect." Maddie chimed in. "We'll just go in, look around, maybe record something for fun. In and out. 10 minutes. I wanted to say no. I almost did. But the mix of adrenaline, the chill in the air, and a few drinks had me saying yes before my better judgment kicked in. We waited until just after midnight. Ethan killed the music, and the 6 of us piled into 2 cars, driving a few blocks until we reached the cul-de-sac where the Walker house sat. Even from a distance, it looked darker than the rest of the street. The porch light was broken, the windows black and reflective. No sound except the soft ticking of cooling engines and the rustling of leaves. Chris was the first to step out, flashlight in hand. "Let's go," he said confidently, already walking toward the house. The gate squealed when we pushed it open. The porch creaked under our weight, and when Ethan tried the front door, it opened too easily. "Unlocked," he said with a grin. "Told you this was meant to be." Inside smelled like old wood and something else. Something metallic. The air was thick, unmoving, like the house had been holding its breath for years. Our flashlights swept across dusty furniture covered with sheets, framed photos turned backward, and wallpaper that had peeled into curling flakes. "This place is disgusting," Maddie muttered. "Creepy as hell," Ethan said. "Perfect for Halloween." We moved through the rooms, laughing nervously, pointing out old pictures and trinkets left behind. But after a while, the mood shifted. It wasn't sudden, more like the laughter just started to sound too loud in the silence. "Hey," one of the new guys whispered. "Do you guys hear that?" We all froze. There was a soft thumping sound coming from upstairs. Chris pointed his flashlight toward the staircase. "Probably raccoons." The sound came again. Thump. Then a dragging noise. "That's not raccoons," Maddie said. Her voice was shaking now. Ethan smirked. "I'll check it out." "Ethan," I started, but he was already climbing the stairs. The flashlight beam bounced across the steps as he reached the top. Then silence. "Ethan?" No response. "Dude, this isn't funny," Chris called out. A few seconds passed, then the light came back into view. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, grinning. "There's nothing up here," he said. "Just a bunch of junk." We all relaxed a little, until we saw what was behind him. Something moved. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow shifting on the wall. But then I saw it clearly, a figure standing at the end of the hall. It was tall and thin, almost blending with the darkness, but the outline was unmistakable. "Ethan," I whispered, "behind you." He turned the flashlight, but as soon as the beam hit the spot, the figure was gone. He came back down fast after that. "Screw this," he said, voice shaky. "Let's go." No one argued. We hurried back toward the front door, but it was shut. Ethan pulled on the handle. It didn't move. "What the hell?" Chris tried it too. Nothing. It was like it had been locked from the outside. Maddie started to panic. "Let's go out the back." We moved toward the kitchen. The air was colder there, almost freezing. The back door was half rotted, hanging crookedly. But when Chris tried to push it open, it barely moved. Something scraped against the floor behind us. I turned and saw one of the sheets that had been covering a chair slide to the ground, by itself. "Okay, I'm done," the guy next to me said, voice trembling. "I'm not." He stopped mid-sentence, eyes fixed on the living room. The old television, covered in dust, flickered on. Static filled the silence. There was no electricity in the house. The static slowly changed to faint images, blurry shapes, flashes of movement. For a second, I thought I saw people, us, standing in the same room, but distorted, like it was being filmed from inside the walls. Maddie screamed and grabbed my arm. "We're getting out. Now!" Chris kicked at the back door until the wood splintered. We squeezed through one by one, stumbling into the cold air. But when we looked back, Ethan wasn't with us. "Ethan!" I shouted. No answer. He had been right behind Maddie when we went through the door. Chris turned on his flashlight, scanning the kitchen through the broken doorway. Empty. "I'm going back in," he said. "No, man," I told him, grabbing his arm. "You saw what was in there." But he yanked free and disappeared inside. We waited in the yard, the rest of us huddled together. Minutes passed. The sound of our breathing was loud in the night. Then from inside the house came a sound that made my blood run cold. A scream. It didn't even sound human. Maddie started sobbing. "We have to call someone." We ran to the cars, fumbling for phones. No signal. I swear none of us could get a single bar. It wasn't until we were halfway down the street that the signal came back. We called 911. The police searched the Walker house that night. They found Ethan's flashlight near the stairs, still on. No sign of him or Chris. The officers said the place was empty, that it looked like no one had been there in years. They even checked the basement. Nothing. For weeks, there were searches, flyers, interviews. The story was on the news for a while. 2 missing teens last seen entering an abandoned home on Halloween night. But eventually, the coverage stopped. People moved on. I tried not to think about it. Tried to believe they ran off somewhere, playing some twisted prank. Then, a few months later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a picture, grainy and dark. It looked like the inside of the Walker house, the living room. In the photo, there were 2 figures standing near the stairs. Their faces were blurred, but their clothes were the same ones Ethan and Chris were wearing that night. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and changed mine a week later. The Walker house was finally torn down last year. They built a new home on the lot, a bright white 2-story with a red door. A young family moved in over the summer. On Halloween night this year, I drove past it. The porch light was on, kids laughing nearby, candy bowls on the steps. For a moment, it looked almost normal. But then I saw something that made me stop. In the upper window, just for a second, I saw 2 shapes standing side by side, watching. When I blinked, they were gone. Story the end. The October night was unnaturally cold for New England. The kind of night that leaves a thin frost on the car windshields even when the streetlights are flickering dimly above. Halloween was just a day away, and the town of Maplewood, Massachusetts, was alive with the usual pre-Halloween energy. Kids darting down the sidewalks in costumes, the smell of pumpkin spice and wood smoke wafting from porches. But underneath it all, a feeling of unease seemed to settle in the back of my mind. That night, what began as a thrill-seeking adventure would turn into something I would never forget, and something that would haunt me every October since. It started with my friends and me, Sean, a tall, reckless guy with a taste for dares, Kelly, always cautious but unable to resist the pull of a story, and me, Alex, forever curious and slightly obsessed with the morbid. Our plan was simple: explore the old Thorne house at the edge of town. The place had been abandoned for decades, a Victorian mansion that had fallen into disrepair. People in town whispered about it constantly, about how the last family to live there vanished, about lights in the windows, shadowy figures seen through broken glass, but no one had dared go inside for years. We were 16 and convinced we could handle it. We left my house just after dusk. The wind whistled through the trees, rattling the dry leaves that blanketed the streets. Sean led the way, flashlight in hand, with Kelly and I following, laughing nervously at our own courage. The further we walked from the center of town, the quieter it became. Streetlights disappeared. replaced by patches of darkness that made our flashlights seem pitifully weak. When we finally reached the Thorne property, my stomach sank. The house was worse than I imagined. Boards sagged under rotting porches, windows were shattered or boarded over, and the wrought iron gate at the entrance was bent, hanging crookedly on one hinge. A single swing on the front porch moved slightly, creaking eerily, though the air was still. The lawn was overgrown, weeds taller than our knees, and the faint smell of decay drifted on the wind. Kelly shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "This is really creepy," she whispered. "Relax," Sean said. "It's just an old house. Nothing's going to happen." We crossed the lawn and pushed open the gate. It groaned and rattled like a dying thing, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Sean was already moving toward the front door, which hung loosely on its hinges. He pushed it open, and a foul odor hit us, a mix of mold, rot, and something else, metallic and faintly sweet. My stomach twisted. The first room we entered was the living room, a cavernous space filled with broken furniture and remnants of a life left behind. Dust covered everything, and newspapers from the late 70s lay in disarray on the floor. One photograph on the wall caught my eye, a family portrait. A man, a woman, and two children stared back at me with expressions that didn't quite reach their eyes. The man's face was pale, almost ghostly, and the children looked wrong, somehow, as though their smiles had been carved into their faces. "Let's check upstairs," Sean said, and without waiting, he started climbing the stairs. They groaned under our weight, each step sounding like it could give way at any moment. The hallway upstairs was long and narrow, doors lining each side, all closed except one at the end. A faint light seemed to seep from underneath it, but there were no windows in that room. Sean nudged the door open. Inside was nothing but a chair, rocking slowly on its own. My heart stopped. I wanted to laugh it off, tell myself it was the wind, but there were no vents, no breeze, nothing to explain the movement. "That chair, it's moving by itself," I whispered. Kelly covered her mouth. No, we shouldn't be here," she said, panic rising. I wanted to agree, but my curiosity kept me rooted in place. Then we noticed something else, a handprint on the floor. Wet, fresh, pressed into the dust. Sean crouched beside it, running his fingers along the outline. "This is impossible," he said. "Someone was just here." That's when the sound started. Low, guttural, coming from the hallway behind us. It wasn't quite human, not an animal either, more like a growl distorted through walls and time. We spun around. The hallway was empty. The growl came again, closer, as if circling us, but still nothing was visible. We ran, down the stairs, through the living room, out the front door, hearts pounding. The night outside felt impossibly quiet, the wind still but cold, pressing against our skin. We didn't stop running until we reached the relative safety of the streetlights a block away. The next morning, Halloween, the story of our night spread. People in town whispered about the Thorne house, about how we'd seen something, but no one really believed us. Still, the image of that rocking chair and the wet handprint haunted us. We tried to laugh it off, to convince ourselves it was adrenaline or imagination, but there was a lingering sense of being watched. Over the next week, strange things began to happen. Doors in our homes would open on their own. Shadows moved independently of light sources. I would wake in the middle of the night to hear scratching on my bedroom window, even though it was locked. Kelly started reporting whispers in her room, faint voices repeating her thoughts back to her. Sean began sleepwalking, sometimes disappearing for hours, and returning with scratches on his arms that he couldn't explain. It all culminated one night when I was alone at home. I was sitting at my desk doing homework when the pressure hit my chest first, a weight, heavy, impossible, like someone leaning on me from nowhere. I looked up, and standing in the doorway was the figure from the Thorne house. Tall, thin, impossibly pale, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into my soul. It didn't speak at first, just pointed a long skeletal finger at me. Time slowed. My heart was hammering, and I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then a whisper scraped across my ears, low and guttural. "You saw me. Now you belong." And it was gone. The pressure lifted, leaving me trembling on the floor, gasping for breath. My parents came home minutes later, alerted by the neighbor who had seen my light on and thought something was wrong. They found me shaking, unable to speak, tears streaming down my face. I tried to explain, but the words failed me. Weeks turned into months, and eventually life moved on. But every Halloween, without fail, I feel it. The presence, the cold weight, the whisper of my name on the wind. Even now, years later, when I drive past the Thorn House, its dark silhouette against the night sky, I swear I see someone standing in the broken windows, watching, waiting. There's a lesson I learned that night, one that no one else in town seems to grasp. Some places are abandoned for a reason, some doors are locked for good, and some shadows are alive, waiting for the foolish to stumble into their domain. Halloween is not just a holiday for candy and costumes. It's a night when the boundary between the living and the forgotten thins, when the past reaches out, and when curiosity can become a curse. I've moved away, left Massachusetts, tried to bury the memory, but I know it will never truly leave me. Every October, the nightmares return. The whispering, the weight, the hollow eyes, the promise that curiosity has a price. And every year, I remember the Thorn House and the figure that dwells within, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to come too close. Story, the end. It was a crisp, wind-whipped night in rural Michigan, the kind of October evening that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Halloween was just a day away, and the town of Pine Hollow was quiet, the streets lined with skeletal trees and the occasional flickering jack-o'-lantern. I was 17 at the time, and like most teenagers, my friends and I were looking for something thrilling, something beyond the normal haunted houses or scary movies. That night, we decided to explore the old Callahan property, an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town that everyone in Pine Hollow claimed was cursed. Stories about the Callahan house had been circulating for decades. The last family to live there disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving all their belongings behind. Neighbors reported strange lights in the windows, shadowy figures roaming the yard, and whispers carried on the wind at night. My friends, Jake, the daredevil of the group, Sarah, cautious but intrigued, and Matt, quiet and always filming, were determined to see it for ourselves. We left my house around 8 p.m., flashlights cutting through the fog that had begun rolling in from the fields. The streets were deserted, and the occasional rustle of leaves made every shadow look alive. As we approached the Callahan house, its silhouette loomed through the fog, a 2-story structure with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and boarded-up windows. The gate to the property hung loose on its hinges, squeaking faintly as we pushed it open. The yard was overgrown, weeds and brambles clawing at our legs, and the faint scent of decay lingered in the air. "I don't know about this," Sarah whispered, shivering as she pulled her jacket tighter. "Relax," Jake said with a grin. "It's just an old house. Nothing's going to jump out at us." We stepped onto the porch, each board groaning under our weight. The front door was cracked open, swinging slightly in the breeze. When we pushed it, a gust of cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of mold, rot, and something else, metallic and faintly sweet. My stomach twisted. Inside, the house was a graveyard of forgotten lives. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs draped the corners, and broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. On a side table, a faded family portrait remained, a man, a woman, and 2 children staring at the camera with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The eyes themselves seemed hollow, lifeless, almost accusatory. "Let's check upstairs," Jake said, though even his bravado couldn't mask the tension in his voice. The staircase creaked ominously with every step. The hallway upstairs was narrow, lined with closed doors, all seeming to watch us as we passed. At the end, one door was slightly ajar, shadows flickering inside. Jake pushed it open. Inside was a rocking chair, moving slowly back and forth, though no one was sitting in it. My heart pounded. "That chair, it's moving," I whispered. Matt raised his camera to film, but his hands trembled. "It's probably just the wind," he muttered, though there were no windows in the room. Then we noticed it. A wet handprint pressed into the dust on the floor, leading from the chair to the corner. Jake knelt and traced it with his finger. Someone was just here," he said, voice barely audible. That's when we heard it. A low, guttural sound coming from the hallway outside, a growl distorted and unnatural, almost human, but wrong. We froze. The sound came again, closer this time, circling the room, but nothing was visible. We ran. Down the stairs, through the living room, out the front door. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing against us, muffling our footsteps. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the main road, lights from nearby houses casting the kind of false security that made our hearts ache. In the following days, strange events escalated. Doors at home opened and closed on their own. Shadows seemed to move independently of their objects. I woke at night to see fleeting figures at the edge of my vision, just beyond the reach of my bed lamp. Sarah reported whispers repeating her thoughts in strange, unfamiliar voices. Matt captured strange figures in his video footage, forms standing silently in corners when no one was there. One night, alone in my room, it happened again. I felt it first, a suffocating pressure on my chest, heavy, impossible, like someone leaning on me with all their weight. I looked up, and there it was, the figure from the Callahan house. Tall, impossibly thin, skin pale and stretched tight over bone, dark hollow eyes fixed on me. Its skeletal hand pointed directly at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The air itself seemed to solidify around me. Then a whisper, raspy and low, scraped across the room. "You saw me. Now you belong." And it vanished. The pressure lifted, leaving me trembling and gasping. My parents returned moments later, alerted by the neighbor finding me in tears, incoherent. I tried to explain, but no one believed me. Years have passed, but every October, the memory returns. Shadows twist strangely, the cold presses in, and whispers echo faintly in the air. I've moved miles away, yet I still catch glimpses of figures in broken windows, waiting. The Callahan house remains abandoned, a dark, hulking silhouette at the edge of town. Every Halloween, I remember the rocking chair, the wet handprint, the figure with hollow eyes, and the lesson I learned. Some doors, once opened, never close. Some shadows, once seen, never release you. Halloween is more than costumes and candy. It is a night when the forgotten reach out to the living and curiosity can carry a price you will never escape. Story the end. The wind had a bite that October night, sharper than usual for a small town in Pennsylvania, rattling the thin panes of windows and scattering dead leaves across the streets. It was Halloween, and the town seemed alive in a way that was both festive and unnerving. The usual parade of children in costumes moved like a river through the neighborhoods, but in certain corners, where the streetlights flickered or the fog hung low, there was a different energy, one that felt like eyes watching from the shadows. Sarah and her friends had just turned 17 and had been planning this Halloween for weeks. They weren't interested in trick-or-treating. That was childish. Instead, they had set their sights on the abandoned motel at the edge of town, a crumbling structure that locals avoided and whose name had long faded from the peeling sign out front. The Riverside Inn had been closed for over 20 years, ever since a family of 4 had been found dead inside, their deaths ruled mysterious and unexplained. Rumors circulated. Some said the father had gone mad and killed everyone. Others whispered of dark rituals, of things that were better left undisturbed. Sarah didn't believe any of it. "I still think this is a bad idea," her friend Emily said, tugging at her costume. She was dressed as a witch, but her nerves made the pointy hat feel more like a crown of anxiety. "Relax," Sarah said, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "We're just going to take a look, snap a few pictures, maybe get some footage. It's perfect for the story we're posting tomorrow." "Perfect is not how I describe going into a place where people died mysteriously," Emily muttered. Their third friend, Josh, laughed. He was dressed as a zombie, his makeup smeared in a way that made him look like a corpse already. "Come on, Em. We've been talking about this since forever. Don't tell me you're scared of a few old boards and ghosts." They arrived at the motel just as the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the trees. The building looked worse than they had imagined. Windows were smashed or boarded up, doors hung crooked on their hinges, and the parking lot was cracked, littered with fallen leaves and broken glass. But it was exactly the kind of place that made a good story, and Sarah felt a thrill despite the chill that ran down her spine. The front door was locked, but a side entrance had long since been torn away by vandals. They slipped inside, flashlights cutting swaths through the gloom. The smell hit them instantly. Mildew, decay, and something metallic that reminded Sarah of blood. The lobby was a cavernous space, dust thick on every surface. The reception desk leaned dangerously to one side, and old brochures for the motel were scattered across the floor, curling from years of neglect. The walls were yellowed, the paint flaking. A staircase led up to the second floor, and the shadows under the stairwell seemed to pulse. "See?" Josh said, trying to make light of the situation. "Nothing. Just creepy old wallpaper and broken furniture." "Yeah," Emily said, not convinced. Her flashlight caught movement, or maybe it was just a trick of the light, but she swore she saw a shadow dart across the room. Sarah took a deep breath. "We're going upstairs." The second floor was worse. The air was colder, heavier, as if the building itself resisted their intrusion. Rooms lined the hall on either side, doors ajar or hanging by their hinges. In one room, the remnants of furniture were stacked in the corner, and the wallpaper had peeled in long, curling strips. A faint hum filled the hallway, low and vibrating, though there was no source. "Do you guys hear that?" Emily whispered. Josh rolled his eyes. "It's the wind. Old buildings make noise." But the hum didn't match the rhythm of the wind. It was steady, almost musical, like a lullaby played slowly and slightly off-key. Sarah stopped in front of room 6, the door slightly open. The smell grew stronger as they approached, sickly sweet, coppery. She nudged the door with her foot. Inside was darkness, except for a faint light in the corner. It looked like a lantern, but the glow flickered unnaturally, as if it had a pulse. "I don't like this," Emily said, taking a step back. "Just a second," Sarah said, stepping inside. She moved toward the corner, her flashlight revealing a small cot, blankets tattered and old, and something else. A figure crouched in the shadows, its back to them. It didn't move when they entered, didn't react. It was pale, unnaturally thin, hair hanging in clumps. The outline of its body seemed distorted, like it didn't quite belong in the room. Guys?" Josh's voice was tight. "Maybe we should go." The figure turned slowly. Its face was a hollow void, eyes sunken so deep they were pools of darkness. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, but no sound came. The hum intensified, vibrating through their bones. Sarah stumbled back, her flashlight shaking in her hands. They ran. Down the hall, down the stairs, crashing through the lobby and out the side door. Their hearts hammered, breaths ragged, the cold night air doing nothing to calm them. They didn't stop until they reached the street, lit by the dim glow of Halloween lights strung between houses. Did anyone else see that?" Emily gasped. I saw it, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't human." Josh looked pale. "We need to leave, now." They didn't speak of it again that night, but the memory clung to them. On the way home, the hum echoed in Sarah's ears, and the shadowed face of the figure haunted her thoughts. The next day, they tried to convince themselves it was a prank, maybe a homeless person squatting, or an animal. But when they looked back at the motel from a distance, the side entrance where they had gone in looked different. The boards that had been removed were now intact, as if the building had repaired itself overnight. And from one broken window, Sarah swore she saw a pair of eyes watching them. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Sarah began noticing movement in her peripheral vision, fleeting shadows that didn't belong. At night, she'd hear humming outside her window, low and rhythmic. Emily started waking up to find scratches on her arms as though someone or something had touched her while she slept. Josh began having nightmares in which he was back at the motel, the figure crouched in the corner, whispering in a language he didn't understand. The four of them eventually drifted apart, unable to face each other after that night. But none of them ever stopped feeling the presence of whatever had been in that room. Sarah moved away from the town eventually, but even miles away, she could sometimes hear the faint lullaby, the pulse of the hum in her chest. She never returned to the motel, never wanted to see it again, but she knew the truth. It was waiting, patient, and it remembered. Years later, news reports surfaced of teenagers entering the Riverside Inn again. Some never came out. Others ran, screaming, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. The local authorities dismissed it as pranksters or drug-induced hysteria, but the whispers persisted. Residents claimed they could see figures in the windows at night, hear faint humming, and smell the metallic tang of blood when passing too close. On Halloween, the motel seemed to awaken. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and those brave or foolish enough to step inside found the air heavy with an almost sentient presence. People reported feeling watched, touched, and sometimes followed home by an invisible entity. Those who returned from the building spoke of distorted figures, whispering voices, and rooms that seemed to shift and change when not observed. Sarah never told her family the full story, fearing they would think she was insane. But even decades later, the memory never left her. The humming in her ears, the shadowy figure, the feeling of being watched, these things lingered, a constant reminder that some places were not meant for human curiosity. The Riverside Inn remained at the edge of town, decayed yet alive, a beacon for the curious and the reckless. And every Halloween, as the wind tore through the streets and children laughed in costume, there was always a faint hum carried on the breeze, a warning or an invitation, depending on who heard it. Those who ignored it often vanished, and those who returned told tales that seemed unbelievable. But in the small town of Pennsylvania, everyone knew better. The motel was patient. It waited, and it remembered every trespasser, every whispered dare, every moment of fear. And for anyone who dared enter, the Riverside Inn offered only one certainty. It would never let them go completely, and it would always be hungry for the next. Story the end. The wind was sharper than usual that Halloween night in rural Vermont, carrying the crisp smell of fallen leaves and something faintly metallic that no one could place. The small town of Maple Hollow was quiet, except for the occasional laughter of children darting from house to house in costumes, and the occasional creak of the old trees lining the streets. But at the far edge of town, along a forgotten dirt road, there was a house that had been abandoned for decades, the Whitmore farmhouse. The house was notorious. Locals avoided it, especially after dark. The windows were shattered or boarded, the paint peeling in long curling strips, and ivy had claimed most of the walls. Rumor had it that on Halloween night 50 years ago, the Whitmore family had vanished without a trace. Neighbors reported seeing lights flicker through the windows that night, and the faint sound of a piano playing in the dark. When police investigated, the house was empty, not a trace of the family left behind. Over the years, daredevils and thrill seekers had ventured inside, some never returning, others fleeing in terror, claiming to have seen figures in the shadows, heard whispers, and felt hands brush against them, though no one else was there. This Halloween, 5 friends decided to explore the infamous house. Carter, the self-proclaimed leader, his girlfriend Naomi, hesitant but determined to face her fears, Daniel, always joking, trying to mask his own unease, Sophie, recently moved to Maple Hollow and unaware of the house's dark history, and Liam, the quiet one, carrying a small camera to document everything. They met near the cemetery at the end of the dirt road as twilight faded, fog rolling in thick over the ground. The Whitmore farmhouse loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the moonlit sky. The air grew colder as they approached, each step crunching leaves and gravel underfoot. "This place is worse than I imagined," Naomi whispered, hugging her jacket tighter. "Come on," Carter said, a forced grin on his face. "Perfect for some footage. Nothing scary, I promise." Daniel smirked. "Yeah, nothing except whatever's been killing or haunting people here for 50 years. Ignoring the jokes, Carter led them to the side entrance, the door long since pried open. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, smelling of rot, mold, and something else metallic, almost like blood. Dust swirled in the weak beams of their flashlights. The floorboards creaked with every step, and shadows seemed to bend and stretch unnaturally across the walls. "See, just an old house," Daniel said, though his voice lacked confidence. They moved from room to room. In the parlor, the fireplace was filled with ash and debris, the furniture overturned. On the walls were strange scratches, symbols that none of them recognized, some etched deeply as if carved with a purpose. The hum began quietly, a low vibration under their feet, almost imperceptible at first, then louder, resonating in their chests. Sophie shivered. I feel like we're not alone." "Ghosts don't exist," Daniel muttered, though he avoided looking into the darkest corners. They climbed the staircase, the air growing colder, heavier. On the second floor, each doorway they passed revealed signs of sudden departure. Drawers left open, clothes strewn on the floors, personal items abandoned as though someone had vanished in the middle of life. The hum continued, steady now, rhythmic, pressing against their eardrums. At the end of the hall, a bedroom door was ajar. Carter pushed it open. Inside, a single bed stood, covered in dust. In the corner, crouched low, was a figure, pale, thin, hair hanging in matted clumps. Its eyes were deep black voids, and its mouth hung open in a silent scream. Carter froze. "What the?" The figure shifted, moving along the wall, then vanished into the shadows, as if swallowed by the room. The humming escalated into a low growl, vibrating in their bones. "Run!" Naomi screamed, and they bolted. Floorboards cracked under their weight, echoing in the emptiness. When they reached the staircase, the front door slammed with a force that shook the entire house. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling. Liam tried the door. Locked. Panic rose in their chests. Shadows twisted along the walls, moving independently of their own. They ran to a back door, partially blocked by debris. With a final push, it opened, spilling them into the cold fog outside. They didn't stop running until they reached the main road, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The farmhouse remained behind them, silent, immobile, yet they all felt the presence, the memory of being watched, the lingering hum, and the figure in the corner. In the following days, each of them experienced strange, unexplainable events. Carter woke to find scratches on his arms that weren't there before, and shadows that moved on their own. Naomi heard whispers calling her name at night. Daniel's camera captured figures in his room when no one else was there. Sophie saw shapes darting along walls and felt cold hands brush against her shoulder. Liam noticed symbols appearing in his notebooks, etched as though by an invisible hand. Halloween came and went, but the farmhouse's influence persisted. On foggy nights, locals claimed they could hear the low hum, even from the road. Teenagers who dared to approach the house often returned, pale, silent, and haunted. The Whitmore farmhouse waits. Patient. Intelligent. It remembers every trespasser, every scream, every heartbeat of terror. On each Halloween, the hum resumes, the shadows lengthen, and the house hungers for the next foolish soul daring enough to step inside. Carter, Naomi, Daniel, Sophie, and Liam never spoke of that night in detail again. Yet the memory of the crouched figure, the smell of decay, the humming, and the shadows remained with them forever, a constant reminder that some places are not meant to be disturbed. The Whitmore farmhouse remains at the edge of Maple Hollow, decayed but alive, waiting, remembering, and always hungering. Story the end. It happened in 2016 in a sleepy town in upstate New York, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and Halloween was the highlight of the year. Streets were lined with carved pumpkins, homes were draped with fake cobwebs, and the smell of roasted pumpkin seeds and caramel apples filled the air. I was 17, helping my older brother Ethan pass out candy while keeping an eye on my younger cousin, Sarah, who was 8. The night started normally enough. Families went house to house, kids ran with candy buckets swinging, and the air buzzed with excitement. Sarah was dressed as a witch, complete with a pointy hat that kept falling over her eyes. I wore a black hoodie and jeans, feeling the weight of responsibility for the night. As the evening wore on, a group of kids asked if they could take a shortcut down a trail that ran behind the old Mill Road houses. It was overgrown, narrow, and no one really went there anymore. Local legends said the trail had been abandoned after a man vanished there in the 1980s, leaving behind his family home, which then burned down under mysterious circumstances. Ethan warned us not to go down there, but Sarah insisted. She wanted to see if any houses were decorated, and I didn't want to seem uncaring, so we reluctantly followed. The trail was darker than the streets, Fizz further grade, the only light coming from our flashlights and the occasional moonbeam breaking through the trees. The farther we walked, the quieter it became. Not just normal quiet, no wind, no rustling leaves, no distant laughter from the neighborhood. Even the flashlight beams seemed swallowed by the darkness. That's when we saw him. A man standing in front of a decrepit house at the end of the trail. His clothes were strange, an old, dark suit that looked decades out of date. His hair was slicked back and his skin was pale, almost gray. The smile on his face was wide, impossible, like it had been carved into his flesh. Sarah froze. I grabbed her hand, my pulse quickening. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. The man didn't move, just stood there, perfectly still, watching us. Then he spoke, his voice low, smooth, almost melodic. "You're brave to be here." I felt a chill creep up my spine. Thanks. We're just walking. We didn't mean to intrude." He tilted his head slowly, unnaturally. "Do you like games?" I glanced at Sarah, who hid behind me, shaking. "Games?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yes," he said. "A special game, one that few are allowed to play." I swallowed hard. We don't play games with strangers." He shrugged slowly, almost theatrically. "Suit yourself, but remember, the game begins whether you play or not." Suddenly, the air seemed heavier, like it pressed against my chest. My flashlight flickered. I noticed for the first time that the man's eyes were jet black, with no reflection at all. He moved closer, but there was no sound, no rustle of clothing, no footsteps, just him gliding forward, smiling. Sarah whimpered, "Cousin, I don't like him." I tightened my grip on her hand. "We're leaving," I said, turning around and starting back down the trail. That's when I noticed a small figure standing further down the path. A boy, maybe 6 or 7, wearing tattered clothes and a mask that was too old, cracked, and yellowed. He didn't move naturally. He glided across the path, silently, following us. I ran. Sarah screamed, clutching my arm. I didn't know how we made it back to the street, but when we emerged, the lights of the neighborhood glowed normally. Kids were still running door to door, and the sound of laughter returned. Relief washed over me. But when I looked back toward the trail, he was there again, the man in the black suit, standing at the edge of the tree line, smiling, and the boy was with him, gliding silently, waiting. We never spoke of it again that night. I didn't tell my parents. Sarah barely remembers it, except to say she felt scared but couldn't move. Weeks later, strange things began happening. Small, carved pumpkins appeared on our doorstep. They weren't like normal Halloween pumpkins. Their faces were too realistic, with eyes that seemed to glint in the dark. Sometimes they had faces that looked eerily familiar, friends, neighbors, strangers. Once, one even looked like Sarah, though she insists she has no memory of it. By the next Halloween, the pumpkins appeared again, each year more frequently. Some mornings I'd find them just inside the door. Some nights I'd hear faint whispers outside my window, soft and deliberate. And every year I felt the same dread that had gripped me the night we saw the man. Years later, my cousin moved away. I moved too, trying to leave the memory behind. But Halloween still makes me uneasy. I avoid dark trails, abandoned houses, and anything that seems too quiet. Sometimes, when the wind rustles the trees just right, I swear I see him standing there, just beyond the edge of vision. One Halloween a few years ago, I was driving through a small town in another state. On the side of the road, a figure stood in front of a dilapidated house. Tall, thin, black suit, impossible smile. Behind him, a small, shadowy figure moved silently. I drove faster, my heart hammered in my chest. I didn't stop. Since that night, I've never walked alone on Halloween. I don't answer doors. I don't take shortcuts through wooded areas or abandoned streets. But I know he's out there, waiting, watching. And every Halloween, I feel the cold dread creep in again. Yeet, because I know that the game never truly ends. And sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I hear the faintest whisper through the walls of my house. "Do you want to play?" I never answer. Story the end. The night air in western Pennsylvania was thick with fog that Halloween, carrying the scent of wet leaves and the faint tang of smoke from nearby bonfires. The town of Harrowsfield was small, sleepy, and mostly quiet, except on nights like this when children's laughter echoed through the streets, mixing with the occasional shriek of wind and the rustle of skeletal trees. But at the very edge of town, past the last streetlight in the cemetery, there was a house that no one dared approach, the old Harper residence. It had stood empty for as long as anyone could remember. A crumbling Victorian mansion with boarded windows, ivy curling up its sides, and a history soaked in rumor and unease. Locals whispered that decades ago, the family that lived there had disappeared over a single Halloween night. The police at the time found the house completely empty. No signs of forced entry, no bodies, nothing but an overturned rocking chair and faint scratches on the wooden floorboards. Over the years, teenagers dared each other to go near it, often returning pale and shaken, claiming to have heard whispers, footsteps, and a low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. This Halloween, a group of 5 friends decided to spend the night there. David, the fearless one, his sister Lila, reluctantly joining to keep an eye on him, Marcus, the skeptic, always making jokes, Jenna, who had moved to town only a month prior, and Eli, the quiet one, who carried a small camera intending to document the night. The group met at the town square as darkness fell, the streets alive with costumed children and Halloween decorations. Beyond the last lamppost, the road narrowed and dipped into a dense patch of woods. At the end of that road, the Harper house loomed, a silhouette against the moonlight, its windows black and its roof sagging with age. "Are we seriously doing this?" Lila whispered, tugging her coat tighter. Absolutely, David said with a grin. Think about it. We'll be the first ones in decades to spend a night inside. Perfect footage for Eli, plus a story we can't even imagine. Marcus smirked. Or we get eaten by ghosts. Either way, epic night. Jenna shivered. I don't like it. That house, it's wrong. Ignoring her, David led the group along the cracked walkway. The front door was boarded, but a side entrance, long pried open, allowed them in. The moment they stepped inside, the air changed. Colder, heavier, smelling of decay and something faintly metallic. Their flashlights cut weak paths through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and dust that danced in the beams of light. See? Marcus said, trying to lighten the mood. Just an old house, nothing scary here. But the house seemed to breathe around them. Floorboards groaned, shadows shifted unnaturally, and a faint humming began, low and persistent. Eli's camera captured every step, but even through the lens, the air felt thick, oppressive. They explored the first floor, moving from room to room. In the parlor, the fireplace was filled with old ashes, but something about the arrangement of the furniture felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. In the dining room, the table was set with dusty plates, as if the family had been interrupted mid-meal. Scratches marred the walls, forming symbols none of them recognized. This is messed up, Lila whispered, hugging herself. David, ignoring her, gestured toward the staircase. Upstairs. That's where we'll get the real story. The second floor was colder still. Their flashlights flickered intermittently, shadows stretching along the walls. Each room revealed more signs of abrupt departure. Overturned chairs, open drawers, faded photographs, and personal belongings left behind. The hallway seemed to elongate unnaturally, twisting as they moved, the humming growing louder, vibrating through their chests. They reached a bedroom at the far end of the hall. The door was ajar, and inside a single bed was covered in a thin layer of dust. In the corner, a figure crouched. Pale, thin, hair matted, its face almost featureless except for deep black eyes that seemed to absorb the light. Its mouth opened in a silent scream. David froze. What the hell? The figure moved. Not running, not fleeing, just gliding across the floor toward the wall, merging with the darkness, vanishing as if swallowed by the room itself. The humming escalated into a low growl, and the air became suffocating. Run! Jenna screamed, and they bolted down the hall. Floorboards cracked beneath them, echoing in the vast emptiness. They reached the staircase, but the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Dust rained from the ceiling. David shook the door. Locked. Come on! Open! Out of the corner of their eyes, shadows began to twist and lengthen along the walls. They darted toward a back door, partially blocked by debris. With a collective effort, they pushed it open and spilled into the foggy night. They didn't stop until they reached the main road, hearts racing, gasping for breath, hands trembling. When they looked back, the Harper house stood silent. No lights flickered, no shadows moved. Yet they all felt it, the sense of being watched, of the house remembering, of the low hum lingering in their ears. Over the following weeks, each of them experienced unsettling events. David began waking up to faint scratching sounds in his room, shadows moving just outside his vision. Lila reported whispers calling her name at night, low and rhythmic, that stopped whenever she tried to locate them. Marcus started noticing symbols appearing on his mirrors, etched lightly into the surface, though he had never drawn them. Jenna felt cold breaths on her neck and scratches on her arms that seemed to appear overnight. Eli's footage, when reviewed, showed fleeting figures, shadows darting across rooms, and eyes staring from corners that were empty when they checked in person. Halloween came and went, but the sense of dread persisted. The Harper house remained at the edge of town, decayed yet alive. Locals claimed that on foggy nights, the low humming could be heard faintly from within, and shadows moved behind the boarded windows. Teenagers who dared approach often returned pale, silent, and changed, their stories too horrifying to recount in detail. Years later, the 5 friends had gone their separate ways, but none of them could forget that night. The memory of the crouched figure, the smell of decay, the oppressive hum, and the shifting shadows haunted them. Some moved far away, yet the feeling of being watched never left, as if the house had implanted a piece of itself inside them. The Harper house waits, patient and intelligent. It remembers every trespasser, every whispered dare, every terrified glance. And on each Halloween night, when the fog rolls in and the wind carries the smell of wet leaves, the low hum resumes, calling the curious, the reckless, the brave, or the foolish into its walls. No one who enters truly leaves, and the house grows hungrier with every new visitor. Story the end. It was Halloween week in 2019 when I moved into the house on Willow Creek Road, a small rental property just outside of Dayton, Ohio. I'd been desperate for somewhere cheap and quiet after my last roommate situation ended badly, and the house seemed perfect. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, and far enough from town that the nights were dead silent. The landlord, a middle-aged woman named Carol, seemed relieved that someone was finally taking it. She kept saying, "It's been empty a while," but every time I asked why, she just gave this uncomfortable smile and said, "You'll be fine, sweetheart. Just don't go into the basement after dark." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. The first few nights were uneventful. The house smelled faintly of damp concrete, but I figured that was just the basement. It was chilly at night, and sometimes I'd hear the pipes groaning or the old wood shifting in the wind. Typical old house noises. Or so I thought. The first time I noticed something off was on October 29th. I woke around 3 a.m. to what sounded like someone moving furniture below me. Slow, dragging sounds. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. It was unmistakable, something heavy scraping across the basement floor. I told myself it must be the boiler or some animal trapped down there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it sounded deliberate. The next morning, I went down to check. The basement was small and unfinished, with low ceilings and a single flickering bulb that barely lit the corners. There was nothing there, just some old shelves, a rusted tool bench, and an ancient furnace. The air down there was icy, heavy, and smelled faintly metallic. When I looked down, though, I noticed something strange. A dark smear across the floor. Thin, almost like something had been dragged. I cleaned it up, convincing myself it was probably rust. That night, the noises came again, but louder this time. It wasn't just dragging anymore. I could hear faint footsteps, then whispering. It was too low to make out words, but it was definitely a voice. I remember holding my breath, frozen in bed, praying it would stop. Around 3:15 a.m., my bedroom door creaked open by itself. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, too terrified to move. The whispers stopped instantly, as if whoever or whatever was down there realized I was awake. I barely slept after that. The next day I called Carol. "You didn't tell me about the noises," I said. There was a pause on the line before she answered, her tone oddly resigned. "You heard them, didn't you?" she said quietly. "Just ignore it. It's the house settling." "But it's not the house," I said, my voice shaking. "There's something in the basement." She didn't reply for several seconds, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "You're not the first tenant to say that." My blood ran cold. She hung up before I could ask anything else. That night, I decided to stay up. I left all the lights on and sat in the living room with my laptop, trying to distract myself. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, so fast that my breath became visible. Then, faintly, I heard the sound again. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving up the basement stairs. I froze, eyes locked on the basement door. The footsteps stopped just behind it. Then, 3 slow knocks. I didn't move. After about a minute, I heard the basement door creak open an inch. The light from the living room spilled into the narrow gap, but nothing was there. No one. The air that came through was freezing cold, like air from a meat locker. Then, from the darkness below, came a whisper. "Why are you here?" I dropped my laptop and ran out of the house barefoot into the cold. I didn't go back until morning. When I finally forced myself to return, the basement door was wide open. I could see down the stairs, and at the bottom, just before the light faded, something was scratched into the concrete wall. It hadn't been there before. The words were crude, uneven, but clear. "Stay." That afternoon, I went to the library to see if there was any history on the property. It turned out there was. In 1998, a man named Thomas Pruitt had lived there with his wife and daughter. One Halloween night, something terrible had happened. The police report said the wife and daughter were found dead in the basement. The husband was missing, presumed responsible, but his body was never found. The neighbors claimed they heard screams that night, but when they went over, the lights were out and the door was locked. The case was never solved. I almost left that night. I should have. But something, curiosity, stupidity, I don't know what, made me stay one more night. Halloween night. The neighborhood kids came by early for candy. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the dread. As the evening went on, the trick-or-treaters disappeared, the streets grew quiet, and the cold crept in again. Around 10 p.m., the lights started to flicker. Then the basement door opened on its own. I could see the stairs, faintly lit by the single bulb below. At the bottom, something was moving. Slow, deliberate. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. A figure. A man, tall, dressed in torn clothing, his face obscured by shadow. He moved one foot onto the first step, then another. Each time the wood creaked loud enough to make my chest tighten. I stumbled backward, whispering, "No, no, no," but I couldn't take my eyes off him. He stopped halfway up the stairs. The air grew colder still, left my ears ringing. Then he spoke, his voice low, rasping, almost human. "They're still down there." The light bulb flickered once, then went out. I heard him move again, faster this time, the sound of heavy boots on the steps. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, pressing my back against it as it shuddered violently from the other side. I could hear breathing, deep, wet, angry. Then, silence. I didn't move for nearly an hour. When I finally opened the door again, the basement was dark and empty. But at the top of the stairs, in the thin dust, were 3 sets of footprints. One large, one smaller, and one tiny. That was the night I left for good. I packed what I could the next morning and drove to a motel an hour away. A few days later, I went back during the day with a friend to collect the rest of my stuff. The house was silent, lifeless, but when we opened the basement door, the bulb flickered on by itself. On the wall, next to where "stay" had been scratched, were 3 new words. Fresh, as if carved overnight. "Thank you for coming." I moved out of state after that. Carol never returned my deposit, and when I tried to contact her again, the number was disconnected. I later found out the house burned down the following spring. The fire department never found a clear cause. They said it started in the basement. Every Halloween since then, at exactly 3 a.m., I wake up to the same sound. Slow, dragging footsteps, faint but deliberate, moving just below me, no matter where I am. I've moved 4 times since, but it doesn't matter. They always find me. And sometimes when it's quiet, I can still hear that whisper, close to my ear. "Why are you here?" Story the end. It was a damp, chilly October evening in the small town of Cedarville, Ohio. The kind of night where the fog from the nearby river crept along the streets, blurring streetlights and muffling sound. Halloween had drawn families and kids into the more populated neighborhoods, but the outskirts of town were nearly deserted. Houses there were older, with peeling paint and long, unkempt lawns, and the occasional sound of a loose sign swinging in the wind made the place feel like it existed out of time. 17-year-old Olivia had lived in Cedarville all her life, though she had always been more of a homebody. Her friends, however, were not. That year, they had concocted a plan that Olivia immediately regretted agreeing to explore the abandoned Carter House on Hollow Street, a house that had been empty for over 40 years. The Carter family had disappeared one Halloween night, leaving all their belongings behind. No one knew exactly what happened, but over the decades, stories had circulated. Screams heard from the house, shadows moving in the windows, and strange, persistent lights that sometimes appeared in the upper floors. Olivia met her friends, Max, a tall boy with a reckless streak, and Jenna, a quiet girl with a nervous energy, outside the chain-link fence that enclosed the Carter property. "Are we seriously doing this?" Olivia asked, shivering despite her jacket. Max grinned. "Of course. It's Halloween. Perfect time for some scares." Jenna looked uneasy. "I've heard the stories. Maybe we shouldn't." Olivia took a deep breath. "We'll just look around. Come on, it'll be fine." They climbed the fence and crept along the overgrown path leading to the front porch. The house loomed ahead, dark and silent. Windows were broken or boarded, and the front door sagged on its hinges. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew, and the fog made the house seem like it was floating slightly above the ground. Once inside, the floorboards groaned under their weight. Dust and debris coated every surface, and old furniture lay broken and scattered. A faint, almost imperceptible coldness filled the air, and Olivia had to resist the urge to shiver. "This is Worse than I thought, Jenna whispered. Max waved a hand dismissively. Relax. It's just old junk. Let's check upstairs. They moved carefully up the staircase. Every step echoed through the empty house. The hallway on the second floor was lined with doors, and the walls were papered with peeling wallpaper that had yellowed with age. In one room, Olivia noticed a small child's drawing pinned to the wall, a crude stick figure family, all with hollow, dark eyes. She stared, a sense of unease creeping up her spine. Why would someone leave a drawing here? She asked softly. Max shrugged. Probably left behind when the house was abandoned. Doesn't mean anything. But as they stepped further down the hall, the air grew colder and the faint sound of whispering reached Olivia's ears. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew clearer, forming words she could almost understand. Stay. Stay with us. Don't leave. She froze. Did you guys hear that? Jenna's face had gone pale. I did. We need to go. Max laughed nervously. It's just the house settling. Old houses do that. Olivia shook her head. No, it's voices. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the hall slammed shut, echoing through the empty house. The three of them jumped. Olivia felt a presence, something cold and heavy pressing down on her chest. She turned and saw a shadow at the edge of the hallway, tall, thin, with long, ragged clothing and no visible face, just darkness where a face should have been. Max, Jenna, do you see that? She whispered, voice trembling. Max squinted into the shadows but saw nothing. Jenna's hand gripped Olivia's arm, trembling. We have to leave. Now. They turned to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch impossibly, doors and walls shifting as they moved. The floorboards beneath them groaned with an unnatural resonance. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, urgent, demanding, Stay. Forever. Join us. In a panic, they tried every exit. Windows were either boarded or opened onto the attic rafters. The front door had disappeared entirely, replaced by a solid wall. Olivia's heart pounded as she realized the house was not just abandoned, it was alive, and it was trapping them. Then they saw them, figures emerging from the shadows, dozens of them, all pale, hollow-eyed, with hands that seemed too long, fingers curling as if reaching for them. Olivia screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. Max grabbed her, trying to pull her toward a window, but something unseen lifted him off the ground, tossing him back against the wall. Jenna screamed, and Olivia bolted down a hallway, her flashlight shaking in her hands. Shadows twisted around her, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. The whispering had become shouting, demanding her attention, calling her name, pulling her toward the darkness. She stumbled into a room at the end of the hall. A mirror covered one wall, its glass cracked and warped. In the reflection, she didn't see herself. She saw dozens of figures, all pale and hollow-eyed, all staring directly at her. The reflection moved independently, stepping closer while Olivia froze, paralyzed with fear. A hand shot out of the mirror, thin and cold, gripping her wrist. Olivia screamed, jerking back, but the grip remained, pulling, insistent. The figures in the mirror pressed closer, their faces stretching into silent screams. She tried to look away, but the reflection had her in its grasp, holding her attention, trapping her. Suddenly, the grip vanished. Olivia fell to the floor, gasping, heart pounding. She scrambled toward the nearest window, throwing it open and climbing onto the fire escape. Max and Jenna were already outside, shaken, tears streaking their faces. They didn't speak as they ran, not stopping until the house was far behind them, swallowed by the fog. The McAllister house, or rather the Carter house, remained silent and empty in the distance, but Olivia knew it wasn't done. That night, and every night after, she would hear whispers when the house was far away in her own room. Shadows moved unnaturally, objects shifted, and mirrors held brief, impossible glimpses of hollow-eyed figures watching her from beyond the glass. Years later, Olivia never returned to Hollow Creek. She moved to a larger city, filled her apartment with lights and locks, yet the unease never left. Every reflective surface seemed to shimmer faintly, and on Halloween nights, she would catch glimpses of those hollow eyes at the edge of her vision. She knew they were patient. They had found her once, and they would never stop waiting. Some houses, some places do not forget. Some horrors once awakened follow you forever. And the Carter house, with its whispering shadows and hollow-eyed reflections, was one of them. Story the end. The town of Hollow Creek, West Virginia, was small. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought They did. On Halloween, the streets filled with children in costumes, laughter echoing under the dim glow of streetlights and jack-o'-lanterns perched on every porch. But the older neighborhoods, the ones near the abandoned steel mill on the edge of town, were silent, and the houses there were long empty, windows shattered, paint peeling, their stories forgotten, except for the ones whispered among teenagers, daring each other to venture inside. 18-year-old Marcus had lived in Hollow Creek his entire life. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a tendency to overestimate his courage. He spent most of his free time exploring the town's abandoned areas, climbing over rusted fences, and sneaking into places adults warned him not to. That Halloween, he had been planning something different. A dare. A group of friends had challenged him to spend the night inside the old McAllister house, a decaying mansion that sat on the far edge of Hollow Creek. The house had been empty for decades, and legends said that anyone who stayed there past midnight would hear voices, whispers of people who had died within its walls. Marcus met his friends outside the rusted gate, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jenna, petite and nervous, clutched her backpack tightly. "I don't know why we're doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "People say this place is cursed." Tyler, a stocky boy with a crooked smile, shrugged. "Cursed? Please. That's just old people talk. We're going in, get it done, and leave. No big deal." Marcus grinned. "Exactly. Let's go before we chicken out." The three of them pushed open the gate, the hinges screeching like a scream, and walked along the cracked driveway. Leaves swirled around their feet as they approached the house, the shadows from the trees stretching unnaturally across the broken lawn. The front door was hanging off its hinges, and the darkness inside seemed to breathe, as if the house itself was alive. "Seriously," Jenna whispered. "I don't like this." Marcus waved her off. "It's just a house. Let's check it out." They stepped inside. The air was heavy with dust and decay, the smell of rot mixed with something faintly metallic. Floorboards creaked under their weight, and the walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling in long strips. Broken furniture was scattered everywhere, and the remnants of a chandelier hung crookedly from the ceiling. As they moved deeper into the house, Marcus noticed a strange detail. Small handprints etched into the dust along the banister of the staircase. They were smeared, almost as if someone or something had been dragging its hands along the wood recently. "What the hell is this?" he murmured. Tyler bent down, brushing away some dust. "Looks like kids' handprints?" Jenna shivered. Maybe. Maybe someone lives here? Like a squatter or something." Marcus didn't answer. His curiosity had a grip on him now. They ascended the staircase, each step groaning under their weight. The hallway on the second floor was long and dark, lined with doors that seemed to breathe shadows. Marcus pushed one open, revealing a bedroom frozen in time. A small bed sat in the center, the sheets yellowed with age. Toys were scattered across the floor, broken and dusty, and a small music box sat on the dresser. Marcus bent down and lifted the lid. The music box played a single, warped melody, faint and eerie. As the sound echoed through the empty house, the temperature seemed to drop sharply. Marcus's breath hung in the air. Then, faintly at first, a whisper joined the melody. "Don't leave." Marcus froze. "Did you hear that?" Jenna's eyes were wide. I think I did." Tyler laughed nervously. "It's just the wind messing with the music box. Come on, let's keep moving." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Shadows shifted at the edge of his vision, curling and stretching in ways that defied the light from their flashlights. Then he saw it. A figure at the far end of the hallway, tall, thin, and swathed in tattered black cloth. Its face was hidden, but the presence radiated a cold, heavy malevolence. "Guys?" Marcus whispered, "There's someone or something there." The figure didn't move, yet Marcus felt its gaze lock onto him, piercing through the darkness. Jenna gasped and grabbed his arm. "We should go. Now!" Tyler hesitated, then shrugged. Fine, he muttered. They turned to leave, but the hallway seemed longer, impossibly stretched. The door at the end of the hall that led to the staircase had vanished, replaced by a wall that hadn't been there before. Panic surged through Marcus. He turned back to the figure, but it had disappeared, leaving only shadows that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices now, screaming and pleading all at once, "Stay! Stay! Come back!" They ran blindly down the hallway, but the layout of the house had changed. Rooms twisted into one another, hallways looping in impossible angles. Doors opened onto walls, windows looked out onto more rooms instead of the outside. The house was alive, and it was closing in. Jenna screamed as something brushed against her shoulder, a cold, slimy hand that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Tyler yelled in frustration, pounding on walls and doors, but nothing gave way. Marcus's flashlight flickered, and in the brief moments of darkness he saw them. Dozens of figures standing just beyond the edges of the light, pale, hollow-eyed, their mouths opening in silent screams. "I told you this was cursed!" Jenna shrieked, tears streaming down her face. Marcus tried to calm her, but the fear in his chest was overwhelming. The whispers became intelligible now, voices from every corner. "Join us. Stay forever. Don't leave." Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time had no meaning. They ran, stumbled, and screamed, but the house refused to let them go. Then, in the center of a vast, empty room, they found it. A mirror, full length, framed in black wood that seemed to twist like living branches. And, in the reflection, Marcus saw not himself, but a pale, hollow-eyed version of him, smiling while his friends screamed. He tried to look away, but the reflection held him. Then he noticed the hands, dozens of pale, thin hands pressed against the other side of the glass, reaching for him, scraping at the surface, leaving deep grooves in the wood. Tyler and Jenna tried to pull him away, but he was frozen, staring into the mirror. The hollow-eyed reflection began to move independently, stepping forward while Marcus remained still. "Marcus!" Jenna screamed. Something cold and invisible lifted him from behind, pressing him into the glass. He struggled, heart hammering, lungs burning. The whispers became deafening, all voices overlapping, all demanding, "Join us, forever." Then, just as suddenly, he fell. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The mirror was normal again, his reflection staring back innocently. The house was silent. The figures were gone. They didn't speak as they fled, scrambling down the staircase and out into the night. The wind hit their faces, and the air smelled of decay and iron. Once they were back on the street, under the flickering lampposts, they dared to look back. The McAllister house appeared normal again, quiet and empty, as if it had never been anything else. They returned to their homes shaken, pale, and silent. Marcus tried to tell his parents, but the words died in his throat. No one believed him, chalking it up to Halloween hysteria. But he knew the truth. The house had followed him home in a way he couldn't see, but could feel. Weeks later, Marcus began to notice small things. Shadows at the corner of his room, objects slightly out of place, whispers when the house was empty. Mirrors seemed to hold a faint distortion, something lurking just beyond the reflection. And every night, he dreamt of the hollow-eyed version of himself, standing in the McAllister mirror, smiling, waiting for the day it could step out. Jenna and Tyler experienced similar things. Jenna would wake to find small handprints along her walls, thin, pale, and dripping with something she refused to name. Tyler swore he saw figures in his reflection at school, watching him with hollow eyes that mirrored the ones in the McAllister mirror. Months passed, but the terror did not fade. Halloween approached again, and Marcus could feel the pull of the house in his dreams, a dark, insistent force tugging at his consciousness. Every reflective surface seemed to shimmer faintly, hinting at something waiting, patient, hungry. Even now, years later, Marcus avoids mirrors when possible. When he cannot, he catches glimpses of movement behind the glass, shadows that do not belong to him, figures waiting. Halloween is no longer a night of costumes and candy. It is a reminder that some doors once opened can never be closed. Some places once entered never truly let you leave. And some reflections are never your own. Story the end. The Halloween air in Ashford, Pennsylvania carried a strange mix of frost and decay that year. I had just turned 16, and like every teenager in town, I was eager to make this Halloween unforgettable. My friends, Danny, Sarah, and my younger cousin Lily, decided to do something different. Instead of the usual trick-or-treating in the safe suburban neighborhoods, we planned to explore the Holloway House, an old mansion on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned for decades. The Holloway House was infamous. Locals whispered that the family who once lived there vanished one Halloween night in the 1960s, leaving the house frozen in time. Rumors told of strange lights in the windows, muffled cries that could be heard at night, and shadows that moved independently of their owners. No one dared enter it after dark, and parents warned children to stay far away. That night, however, curiosity overpowered caution. We drove up to the mansion just as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple. The car headlights barely illuminated the winding, overgrown driveway. Trees lined the property like silent sentinels, their branches swaying and creaking ominously in the wind. The mansion itself loomed ahead, dark and silent, its broken windows resembling empty eyes staring at us. The wooden shutters were cracked, and vines crept up the walls like veins, making the house appear almost alive. Danny, always the fearless one, jumped out first. "Let's do this. Worst case, we get some spooky photos for Instagram." Sarah shivered. "This place, it's not right. We should just go." I tried to assure her. "It's just an old house. We'll take a quick look and leave." Lily clung to my arm, her small fingers trembling. "I don't like it. I don't like it at all." Despite the warnings, we stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under our weight, echoing through the foggy night. The front door was partially open, swinging slightly as if pushed by the wind, though the night was eerily still. I pushed it open, and the hinges let out a long, tortured squeal. Inside, the air was cold and thick with dust. The floor was littered with broken furniture, newspapers yellowed with age, and shattered glass. Shadows clung to the corners of every room, moving subtly as if aware of our presence. Our flashlights barely pierced the gloom. We started with the first floor, moving from room to room. Most were empty, but the air was heavy, almost suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Old portraits lined the walls, the painted eyes seeming to follow us. In the parlor, a fireplace sat cold and empty, but on the mantel were dozens of photographs of the Holloway family. They were smiling, frozen in time, yet the smiles didn't feel warm. They felt wrong, hollow, almost mocking. Then we heard it, the sound of footsteps on the second floor, slow, deliberate, echoing through the house. "Did you hear that?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. Danny laughed nervously. "It's just the floorboards. Or maybe an animal." The footsteps stopped, then a whisper floated down the stairs. "Leave, now." We froze. The voice was faint, breathy, and unmistakably human. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We should go. Now." I nodded, my heart pounding, but curiosity held me in place. We decided to cautiously check the second floor. As we climbed the stairs, the air grew colder, our breaths visible in the flashlight beams. The hallway stretched far beyond what I expected, lined with closed doors, each one seeming to pulse in the darkness. At the end of the hall, a faint light flickered under a door. We approached it slowly. The room beyond was a child's bedroom, untouched by time. Toys were scattered across the floor, a small bed neatly made, and the wallpaper faded but still patterned with playful designs. In the corner, a rocking chair moved slightly as if someone had just left it. Danny stepped forward. "See? Nothing to worry about." But the rocking chair suddenly stopped, and a shadow stretched across the wall. A dark, humanoid figure, taller than any of us, moving independently of the moonlight. The whispering started again, overlapping voices this time. "Go, go, stay, don't." Panic surged. We bolted down the hallway, trying doors at random, but many were locked or led to closets. The shadow seemed to follow, moving faster than we could run. Behind us, a door slammed shut, and the laughter of children echoed from somewhere deep within the house, warped and distorted. We reached the stairs and rushed down, the floorboards groaning alarmingly under our weight. When we reached the first floor, the front door was gone. Where it had been, there was only a solid wall, smooth and unyielding. No way," Sarah whispered. Lily began to cry. I told you this place is bad." Danny banged on the wall in frustration. We need another way out." Suddenly from the shadows, a figure emerged. Not human, at least not entirely. Its body was elongated, limbs too long, face indistinct but somehow watching us directly. It moved with unnatural fluidity, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. "Leave, leave, leave." We found a small door at the back of the house, almost hidden behind an old wardrobe. Without hesitation, we forced it open and stumbled into the yard. The night air never felt so alive, so sharp against our skin. The fog had thickened, and we could barely see the mansion behind us, yet we could feel it watching, waiting. We didn't stop running until we reached my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine sputtered before roaring to life, and we sped down the driveway, not daring to look back. The next day, I tried to find records about the Holloway house. The town archives confirmed part of the story. The family had disappeared one Halloween night in 1964. Search parties never found a trace. Subsequent trespassers reported hearing whispers, seeing shadows, and feeling icy cold even in the middle of summer. Some locals claim the house itself was alive, that it trapped the family and others in some other realm. In the weeks following our visit, strange things began happening at my house. Toys moved when no one touched them. Shadows lingered in corners, and sometimes in the foggy night I could hear a child's laughter outside my window. Sarah moved away, unable to bear the town's presence. Danny grew quiet and withdrawn, and Lily refused to ever speak of that night again. Years later, I returned to Ashford for a visit. I drove past the Holloway house's location, expecting to see the crumbling mansion. But it was gone. No ruins, no foundations, nothing but the overgrown grass and a single oak tree. Rationally, I knew the house must have been demolished decades ago. But as I drove by, I caught a movement in the trees, a shadow, unnaturally tall, watching me. I pressed the gas pedal harder and didn't look back. Even now, every Halloween, when fog rolls in and the wind carries the scent of damp leaves, I remember that night. The whispers, the shadows, the sense of being hunted. And I know the Holloway house, or whatever it became, wasn't just a building. It was something alive, patient, and waiting for the next curious soul to enter its darkness. Story the end. It was Halloween night in 2014, in a small rural town in Indiana where people still trusted their neighbors, where every house on the block gave out full-sized candy bars, and the air smelled like burning leaves and cider. I was 16 that year, not quite old enough to feel like an adult, but too old to trick or treat, so I agreed to help my friend's mom with her little brother, Jamie. He was 7, tiny, hyper, and obsessed with superheroes. The night was cold enough to make our breath visible. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered along the sidewalks, and the streets were alive with the sounds of children shouting, "Trick or treat," and laughter echoing through the night. Everything felt perfect, the way Halloween should feel, until we turned down Birch Hollow Road. Birch Hollow wasn't part of the normal trick-or-treat route. The houses were older, more spread out, and most of the families who lived there had either moved away or passed on. My mom used to tell me stories about that road when I was little, about a house that had burned down in the late 70s with a family still inside, about how no one ever rebuilt there, and how sometimes if you drove by late enough at night, you could still see lights in the woods where no house stood anymore. I never believed her. But that night, Jamie had spotted something down that way. A big, elaborate display of Halloween decorations, the kind with motion sensors and fog machines. He begged to go see it, and I didn't have the heart to say no. The deeper we walked down Birch Hollow, the quieter it became. The laughter, the music, even the sound of our footsteps seemed to dull. The houses here were dark, most of them boarded up or sagging under the weight of neglect. The only light came from the moon and the occasional flicker of a dying street lamp. "Are you sure there's something down here?" I asked. Jamie nodded, pointing ahead. "There, look!" Through the trees I saw it, a faint orange glow, like the light of 100 candles. We followed the winding dirt path that led off the road, crunching through leaves until we reached a clearing. At the center of the clearing was an old 2-story farmhouse I didn't even know existed. The paint was peeled away and the porch sagged, but the entire place was covered in carved pumpkins. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each one glowed from within, their jagged faces flickering in the dark. "Whoa," Jamie whispered. "This is awesome." It was impressive, I'll admit. Each pumpkin was carved differently, some smiling, some frowning, some twisted into grotesque, disturbing shapes. But as I got closer, something about them felt off. The carvings weren't random or playful. They were too detailed, too human. Some looked like screaming faces. "Maybe we should go back," I said, my stomach tightening. Before Jamie could answer, a voice called out from the porch. "Don't be shy, come closer." We froze. An old man was sitting in a rocking chair, half shrouded in shadow. He was tall and thin, with long gray hair that hung in greasy strands over his shoulders. His eyes reflected the candle light, gleaming almost unnaturally. "Happy Halloween," he said, smiling with too many teeth. "You want some candy, don't you?" Jamie looked up at me, hesitant. "It's okay," the man said softly, almost kindly. It's Halloween, after all. Everyone deserves a treat. He stood up slowly, bones cracking audibly, and stepped down from the porch. He moved strangely, like his limbs didn't quite work the way they should. He reached into the pocket of his tattered coat and pulled out a handful of old-fashioned candies, the kind wrapped in orange and black wax paper. I took a step back, instinctively putting my hand on Jamie's shoulder. "Thanks, but we're good," I said quickly. The man's smile faltered. "You should always take a gift when it's offered," he murmured. Then he looked directly at Jamie. "You, especially." Jamie hid behind me. "We have to go," I said, grabbing his arm. The old man didn't stop us. He just stood there, still smiling, watching as we backed away. "Don't worry," he called out, voice echoing unnaturally through the trees. "If you don't take candy, you still owe a trick." We ran. I don't even remember making it back to the road, only the feeling of my lungs burning and my heart pounding in my throat. When we finally reached the streetlights and the noise of the town again, I looked back, half expecting to see him standing there, but the path was gone. Completely. As if the clearing and that house had never existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those pumpkins, those faces that looked too real, and the way his smile didn't fade when we ran. Around midnight, I heard a faint sound outside my window, soft, deliberate scratching. I froze, barely breathing. It came again, slow, rhythmic, like someone tracing shapes on the glass. I forced myself to look. There was a pumpkin sitting on the windowsill outside. One I hadn't carved, one that hadn't been there before. Its face wasn't a normal jack-o'-lantern smile. It was a face, a perfect, carved replica of Jamie's face. I screamed for my parents. By the time they came into the room, the pumpkin was gone. I thought maybe I'd imagined it until the next morning, when I went outside and found the faintest smear of candle wax on the sill. Jamie didn't remember anything the next day. He said he'd had a fun night, but when I mentioned the old man, he looked confused, like the memory had been wiped clean. Years went by. I graduated, moved away, tried to forget. But Halloween always brought the same uneasy feeling. Sometimes I'd see a flicker of orange light from the woods or hear laughter that didn't sound quite right. Then, 2 years ago, my mom called me. Her voice was shaking. "It's Jamie," she said. "He's gone." They found his bike at the edge of Birch Hollow Road. He'd gone out for a ride and never came home. The police searched the woods for days but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just his bike lying in the dirt and one small, freshly carved pumpkin sitting beside it. I flew home for the search. The woods looked smaller than I remembered, but that night when I walked the same dirt path, I saw a faint orange glow again, flickering deep among the trees. Against every instinct I had, I followed it. The farmhouse was there, exactly as I remembered it, the porch sagging, the windows black, and hundreds of pumpkins glowing softly in the dark. I called out for Jamie, voice shaking, but no one answered. The pumpkins were different this time. Some of them had faces I recognized, neighbors, friends from school. And then I saw it. One new pumpkin sitting apart from the rest. Small, freshly carved. It looked exactly like Jamie, his expression frozen in fear. That's when I heard the old man's voice behind me. "You should have taken the candy." I ran so fast I tripped and tore my jeans on the branches. I didn't stop running until I reached the road, gasping, shaking, and sobbing. When I looked back, there was nothing. No light, no house, no pumpkins, just darkness. The police didn't believe me when I told them what I'd seen. They searched again, but found nothing. Birch Hollow is off limits now. They call it condemned property. But every Halloween, people claim they see a faint glow deep in the woods. I moved states away after that. I've tried to forget, but every October, a small pumpkin shows up on my doorstep, always carved with a face I recognize. Sometimes it's someone I went to school with. Sometimes it's a stranger I saw once in a grocery store. Last year, it was my own face. I smashed it, threw it out, tried to ignore it. But the next morning, another one appeared. Same face, same expression. I haven't opened my blinds since then, haven't answered the door on Halloween. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and the air smells like smoke and sugar, I swear I hear a faint voice outside whispering through the glass, "Don't worry. If you don't take candy, you still owe a trick." And every time I feel that same cold dread I felt as a kid, because I know he's still out there, somewhere in those woods, carving pumpkins and waiting for the next person to wander down Birch Hollow Road. Story the end. It was mid-October when I first noticed something off about my neighborhood. I had recently moved to a small town in Connecticut, the kind of place where people put pumpkins on their porches weeks before Halloween, and the streets are eerily quiet once the sun sets. The house I rented was modest, 2 stories, with a small yard and a long driveway. Everything seemed normal, too normal maybe. I liked quiet, but that week there was a feeling I couldn't shake. Something in the air felt heavy, like it had been waiting for something. The first night, I was unpacking boxes when I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from the wall that separated my house from the next one. I froze. I had been careful to inspect the house before moving in. The walls were solid, nothing loose. I told myself it was the wind or maybe an animal trapped somewhere, but the scratching continued for hours, rhythmic and deliberate. It wasn't random. It sounded like nails dragging across plaster. The next day, I went outside to check the neighbor's house. That house had been abandoned for years, its windows dirty and broken, porch boards rotting. There was a faint smell of decay, like mold mixed with something metallic. I could swear I saw a shadow move behind the curtain in the upstairs window. I blinked, and it was gone. I asked a neighbor about the house, and she hesitated before saying, "Nobody's been in there for a long time. Some people say it's haunted." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Over the next few days, the incidents escalated. I would hear soft footsteps outside my bedroom window at night, though no one else lived on the block. I began seeing flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark figure standing in the yard or in the upstairs window of the abandoned house. One evening, I stepped outside to get a better look, and the figure disappeared instantly, like it had melted into the darkness. My rational mind told me it was probably a trick of the shadows, but a deep part of me knew it wasn't. By the week of Halloween, the activity had grown worse. I would come home to find my porch light on when I was certain I had turned it off. Windows I had locked were sometimes slightly ajar. One night, I heard soft, deliberate knocking at the front door of the abandoned house. 3 knocks, then 2 more. Hollow, metallic, precise. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing whispers, too low to understand at first, then slowly forming my name. Emily. Emily. My heart would pound, and I felt eyes on me even when I was alone. Halloween arrived. The neighborhood was alive with decorations and children in costumes. Pumpkins flickered on porches, fake cobwebs draped over bushes, but the abandoned house remained dark, swallowing the light from the street lamps. I noticed the shadows moving more now, figures standing behind broken windows, staring. One small boy, dressed as a skeleton, ran up to me and whispered, "She's waiting for you. She sees you." His face was pale and terrified. Before I could say anything, he bolted back to the street. That night, the activity peaked. I heard footsteps circling my house, heavy and deliberate. The whispers grew louder. "Emily. Emily." I grabbed my phone to call for help, but the lines were dead. No cell service, no landline, nothing. I tried to ignore it, but when I looked out the window, I saw her, a woman in a tattered black dress, standing in the upstairs window of the abandoned house. Her hair hung in wet, stringy strands across her pale face, and her eyes were hollow. She smiled, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile that makes your stomach turn. Something compelled me to go toward the house, though terror gripped every inch of my body. I stepped onto the porch, and the door creaked open, though there was no wind. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The floorboards groaned under my feet. Whispers echoed around me, all calling my name, urging me forward. I climbed the stairs, drawn to the second floor, my pulse racing. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors. From behind one, I heard deep breathing. I reached for the knob, and the whispering voice hissed in my ear, "Don't open it." My hand moved anyway. Inside the room, dozens of figures stood, all facing me, all identical, the same woman in the same tattered dress, eyes hollow, smiling. The temperature dropped, my breath visible in the cold, stale air. They began chanting, "Stay, forever, join us." The door slammed behind me. I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were moving through water. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe days. Finally, the room went silent. I woke outside the house the next morning, standing on the lawn. Everything was quiet, normal, as if nothing had happened. I ran to my own home and barricaded myself inside, shaking. Weeks later, I checked the property online. The house had been sold, supposedly renovated. The listing showed it perfect. No broken windows, no rotting porch, nothing that matched what I had seen. I haven't returned since. But on quiet nights, especially around Halloween, I still hear whispers on the wind, calling my name, reminding me that she is still out there if I'm half waiting. Story the end. It was late October in a small American town called Maple Hollow, the kind of place that always seemed too quiet except around Halloween. The houses were set back behind aging oak trees, and every year the town put up fake spider webs and glowing orange lights to make the quiet streets look festive. I had just moved there the summer before, renting a little one-story house at the end of Willow Street. I didn't know many people yet, but the neighbors were friendly enough. Wave from the porch friendly, not come over for dinner friendly. I worked nights at a local radio station, running the board for a talk show that ended around midnight. That meant I usually drove home alone, long after everyone else's lights were out. I liked it at first, the calm, the empty roads. But as Halloween approached, something about those drives home started to feel different. It began around the second week of October. I was heading home one night when I noticed a man walking along the side of the road. He was wearing a long, tattered coat and what looked like a rubber mask, the kind you'd find in a discount Halloween store. The mask had a pale, distorted face, but from my headlights, I could tell it wasn't one of those detailed ones, just cheap latex. It struck me as strange because it was almost 1 a.m., and he was walking in the opposite direction of town, down the winding road that led into the woods. I slowed down a bit, thinking maybe he needed help. But when my headlights hit him fully, he stopped walking, just stood there. I couldn't see his eyes, but his head tilted slightly as I passed, following my car until I went around the bend. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was just some guy being weird. Maybe drunk, maybe walking home from a party. But something about the way he turned his head and stopped moving made my chest tighten. That night, when I got home, I double-checked the locks. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves and the Halloween atmosphere. But I kept thinking about how empty the road was, how no one else had seen him. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, I saw him a little closer to town, walking the same direction, same coat, same mask. Only now, there was a faint orange glow in his hand. A flashlight, maybe, or a candle. I slowed down again, thinking it couldn't be the same guy. When I got close enough, he turned his head toward me, just like before. No movement, no wave, just that slow, deliberate turn. I sped up, my palms sweating on the steering wheel. When I got home, I parked right up against my porch instead of leaving the car in the driveway. I sat in the dark for a minute, listening to my heart pounding in my ears. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That weekend, I mentioned it to my neighbor, an older woman named Carol who'd lived there for 30 years. She frowned when I told her. "Where exactly did you see him?" she asked. "On the road between town and Willow Street," I said. "Twice, same guy." She gave a short, uneasy laugh. "You probably saw one of the Hollow Walk folks." "The what?" "Every year, a bunch of teenagers walk through the woods in costume the week before Halloween, supposed to be some local tradition. They scare drivers, take pictures for social media. My grandkids did it once. Probably just that." Her explanation made sense, and I wanted to believe it, but something in her tone said she didn't fully believe it herself. By the time Halloween week rolled around, I'd managed to forget about it. The radio station was running a special Haunted Airwaves segment, and I was working extra hours. On Halloween night, I left work around 12:30 a.m., the streets empty except for the occasional pumpkin on a porch still flickering. The night was cold, clear, and still. I remember the way my breath fogged the windshield as I drove through the winding road out of town. The headlights caught the leaves blowing across the asphalt. I turned up the radio, letting the static and distant rock music fill the car. Then I saw him again. Same spot as the first night, just past the turnoff near the woods. Same mask, same tattered coat. This time he was standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes hard. My tires screeched, and the car fishtailed slightly before stopping. My heart slammed against my ribs. He didn't move. For a moment, we just sat there, the man and me. Nothing between us, but the low beams of my headlights cutting through the dark. Then, slowly, he lifted his arm and pointed directly at me. Not a wave, not a gesture for help, just a straight, slow point. I slammed the gas pedal and swerved around him. My rearview mirror showed his figure shrinking in the distance, still standing dead center of the road. I drove the rest of the way home at nearly 70, not caring about the speed limit. When I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. Inside, the house felt colder than usual. I checked every room, every window. I didn't see anything out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around 2 a.m., I finally went to bed. I must have been half asleep when I heard a noise, a faint tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from outside my bedroom window. At first, I told myself it was a branch, but the sound was too deliberate, too evenly spaced. Tap, tap, tap. I lay there, barely breathing, trying to convince myself to look. When I finally did, I regretted it immediately. Through the thin curtains, I could make out a shape, someone standing right outside the window. The pale shape of that same mask was visible through the fabric, close enough that I could see the outline of the eyes and mouth. I scrambled for my phone, but my hands were shaking too much to type. I managed to call 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was outside my window. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the yard and found footprints in the mud beneath the window, leading back toward the woods. I told them about the man on the road, the coat, the mask. They said they'd patrol the area, but admitted it was probably just a Halloween prank. For a few nights, nothing happened. I tried to convince myself it was over, but then strange things started happening around the house. One morning, I found my porch light shattered. A few days later, the gate that led to my backyard was wide open, even though I always kept it latched. I began hearing noises at night, creaking floors, faint footsteps in the hallway. Once I woke up to the sound of the front doorknob turning slowly, followed by the soft creak of the floorboards near the living room. Each time I told myself it was in my head, that I was just paranoid from that Halloween night. Then came November 3rd. That evening, I came home from work and found something waiting on my porch. It was a small black pumpkin with a candle inside, still burning. Stuck into the pumpkin was a folded piece of paper. I hesitated before picking it up. The paper was yellowed and smelled faintly of smoke. On it was written in uneven handwriting, "You should have stopped." I froze. My first thought was that someone was messing with me. Maybe one of the teenagers Carol mentioned. But how would they know where I lived? I hadn't told anyone about seeing that man except her. I called the police again. They came out, took the pumpkin, and said they'd add it to their report. The officer, a younger guy named Reynolds, said it was probably some local prankster trying to freak me out. Halloween hangover, he called it. That night, I barely slept. I left every light on and sat in the living room with a baseball bat across my knees. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, the tapping. This time, it wasn't the window. It was the front door. 3 slow knocks. I stood frozen, staring at the door. The peephole showed nothing but darkness. I didn't move. After a long moment, the knocking stopped. I waited another 30 minutes before daring to approach the window. The street was empty. But on the sidewalk, right in front of my house, lay another piece of paper. I didn't go outside to get it. The next morning, I found it still there, weighted down by a small rock. This one said, "I saw you again." I called in sick that day. I couldn't focus. I walked through the house again and again, checking every lock, every corner. By evening, I decided I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and went to stay at a cheap motel on the other side of town. When I came back 2 days later, the house was quiet. Nothing seemed out of place, until I walked into the kitchen. On the table was my own car key. I hadn't left it there. The key was bent slightly, like someone had twisted it with their hands. Underneath it was another note. "You shouldn't have left." That was when I called Carol. She came over, looked at the note, and went pale. "You need to talk to Sheriff Dalton," she said quietly. "I don't think this is a prank." At the sheriff's office, I told them everything again. Dalton listened carefully, tapping a pen against his desk. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "You're not the first one," he said. "We've had 3 reports this month of someone in a mask scaring people near that stretch of road. But here's the thing. The first report came from 10 years ago. Same description. Every few years, around Halloween, he comes back. We've never caught anyone. He said they'd keep an eye out and suggested I install cameras around my house. That night, I did just that, bought a set of cheap security cameras from a local hardware store and set them up on the porch, backyard, and driveway. The next few nights were quiet. I started to think maybe it was finally over. Then one morning, I checked the footage from the night before. Around 2:47 a.m., the camera facing my front porch showed movement. A tall figure stepped into view wearing that same tattered coat and pale mask. He walked up to the door, leaned in close to the lens, and whispered something. The audio was faint, but I replayed it again and again until I could make it out. It sounded like, "I found you." Then he turned and walked off into the darkness. I called the sheriff again, sent them the footage, but there wasn't much they could do. The figure never showed his face, and the camera resolution was too low to identify anything clearly. That day, I took off work and started packing my things. I was done with Maple Hollow. I didn't care about the lease or the deposit. I just wanted out. I spent the rest of the day loading boxes into my car. By the time I finished, it was dark. I was about to lock the front door when I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. I froze. My heart felt like it was trying to crawl out of my chest. I didn't move. The knocks came again, louder this time. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't open the door. I just grabbed my keys and ran out the back, straight to my car. As I started the engine, I glanced toward the porch. For a split second, illuminated by the headlights, I saw him standing there, motionless, head tilted, mask glinting in the light. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove through the night until I reached the next town over, checking my mirrors every few minutes. I stayed with a friend for a few weeks. The police checked my house again, found nothing. No footprints this time, no signs of forced entry. It was like he'd never been there. Eventually, I moved to another state. I tried to forget about it, but sometimes when I'm driving home late at night, I still catch myself scanning the side of the road, half expecting to see that same figure walking toward me. And last Halloween, I did. Different state, different town, but same coat, same mask, same slow turn of the head as I passed. I told myself it couldn't be real, just someone in a similar costume. But when I pulled into my driveway that night, there was something waiting on my porch. A black pumpkin. And inside it, a small piece of paper. "You can't leave." Story the end. It was the last week of October when the temperature in Bloomington, Indiana dropped enough for your breath to come out white in the mornings. The air had that dry, metallic chill that always made me nostalgic for my childhood Halloweens, back when I'd run through the suburbs dressed as a vampire or some cheap monster clutching a pillowcase of candy. But in 2021, I was 27, working night shifts at a small local radio station, and Halloween didn't mean much beyond extra calls from drunk listeners. My apartment was in an old Victorian house that had been divided into 4 units. I lived on the second floor, right above a quiet woman named Carol, and across from a couple of IU students who mostly kept to themselves. The place was cheap, which should have been a red flag. The floors creaked, no matter how light you walked. The windows rattled when it was windy, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps in the attic. The landlord brushed it off as squirrels. I didn't believe that, but I didn't care enough to push him about it. Halloween fell on a Sunday that year, which meant I was covering the midnight to 6 shift. The station, WBLM, was small. Local news, weather, and old classic rock. The building was on the outskirts of town, near the edge of a cornfield, and though there were a few houses nearby, once the sun went down, the whole area felt swallowed by darkness. I'd worked there almost 2 years, and I'd grown used to being the only one in the building at night. But that Halloween, something felt off. It started around 11:30 p.m. I was getting ready to leave my apartment, locking up and double-checking that I had my phone charger. When I stepped into the hallway, I heard someone walking above me, in the attic. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone pacing. I froze. The landlord had told me once that there wasn't a real attic up there, just crawl space and insulation. Still, the sound was unmistakable, heavy enough to be human. I stood there, keys in hand, listening. It went on for maybe 10 seconds before it stopped, replaced by a faint scraping sound, like wood on wood. Probably squirrels, I muttered under my breath, though it sounded hollow, even to me. I hurried down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Carol's light was on downstairs, but I didn't see her through the little window in her door. When I stepped outside, the air hit me with a freezing gust. The street was empty. No trick-or-treaters, no cars. Just the wind pushing dead leaves in little spirals. The drive to the station took about 15 minutes. The roads were mostly clear, though I did pass a few groups of college kids in costumes, stumbling out of house parties. When I pulled into the gravel lot behind the building, the old neon sign flickered above the door, WBLM 93.7. The building looked even more isolated than usual, the cornfield behind it a dark, rustling wall. Inside, everything was as usual, the hum of old electronics, the faint smell of dust and coffee, the red on-air light above the booth door. I did a quick walk through the rooms out of habit, storage, bathroom, break room, before settling into the booth. I always liked the quiet of the night shift. It felt like the whole world was asleep, except for me. By 1 a.m., the show was running smoothly. I played the pre-recorded set list, read a few weather updates, and answered a call from a regular listener who liked to rant about the government hiding UFOs. Pretty standard for Halloween night, but then the power flickered. Just a quick dimming of the lights, maybe half a second, but enough to make every monitor blink and reboot. When the emergency generator kicked in, I let out a nervous laugh. It wasn't uncommon out there. The old wiring in the nearby cornfield sometimes made for weird surges. Still, the timing felt strange. I stepped outside the booth to check the breaker panel near the back of the hall. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, faintly strobing, and the long corridor looked endless. The air felt oddly cold for an indoor space. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They came from the far end of the hallway, slow, steady, deliberate. I froze, thinking maybe one of the DJs from the earlier shift had returned, but the station only had one entrance and I hadn't heard the door open. The footsteps continued, growing louder until I finally saw something move at the end of the corridor, a shadow crossing the thin strip of light coming from the break room. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The steps stopped. I stood there, waiting, my pulse quickening. Then, faintly, came the creak of a door opening. The storage room, maybe. I took a cautious step forward, the floor creaking under my shoes. "Who's there?" I asked again, louder. Silence. When I reached the end of the hallway, I saw the storage door was half open. The air around it felt colder, somehow damp. I pushed it the rest of the way and flipped on the light. The small room was packed with old sound equipment, microphone stands, boxes of vinyls. Empty. Except there were footprints on the dusty floor. Bare footprints. Small, child-sized, leading from the back wall toward the door. I stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The dust on that floor hadn't been disturbed in months. I would have noticed it. But there they were. Small prints. Faint but clear, ending right at my feet. I backed away and shut the door, my hands shaking. When I returned to the booth, the song that had been playing had ended, but something else was on the air, a faint, static-filled whisper. I frowned and turned up the monitor. The sound wasn't part of any file or program. It was live. It sounded like breathing. "Hello," I said into the mic, half out of instinct. The breathing stopped. Then, after a pause, a soft voice whispered through the speakers. "Don't let him in." I froze, staring at the monitor. "Who is this?" I said, my voice unsteady. "This line is for call-ins only. Who's on the air?" No response, just static. Then, suddenly, the phone on the console started ringing. I grabbed it, still staring at the screen. "WBLM, you're live on the air." A man's voice cut me off. "You're not supposed to be there." My stomach dropped. The voice was deep, calm, and oddly familiar. "Who is this?" I demanded. "You shouldn't be there tonight," the voice said. "Get out." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. Prank calls weren't unusual on Halloween, but something about the tone in his voice, it wasn't a joke. It was too flat, too serious. I tried to shake it off, switching the station to autopilot mode so the music would keep playing. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside for some air. The cold hit me like a slap. The cornfield rustled softly under the moonlight. Everything was still. I stood there, breathing hard, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then I noticed something at the edge of the field. A shape. At first I thought it was just a scarecrow, or maybe one of those plastic Halloween decorations some local kids had set up, but as my eyes adjusted I realized it was moving. It stood just a few feet into the cornfield, tall, unmoving, except for a slow tilt of the head. I couldn't make out its face, but it was definitely a person. "Hey," I called out, my voice trembling despite myself. "This is private property." The figure didn't respond, just tilted its head again, slightly more to the side like it was studying me. I stepped back toward the door. "You need to leave, or I'm calling the police." Nothing. Then, as I turned the knob to go back inside, the figure vanished into the corn. I slammed the door shut and locked it. When I went back to the booth, the computer screens had glitched again. One monitor was frozen on static, the other flashing random blocks of color. The main system clock read 3 a.m., which made no sense because I'd only been outside for maybe 5 minutes. Then I saw it. On the glass window of the booth, the inside glass facing me, there was a single handprint. Small, like a child's. I wiped it with my sleeve, but it didn't smear. It was on the other side, inside the booth. I turned slowly, every hair on my neck rising. The booth was empty. But the faint sound of breathing had returned. It came from the mic. I yanked the headset off and stepped back, my pulse hammering. The sound was still there, raspy, slow, almost like whoever was on the other end was struggling to breathe. I turned the volume down, but even with the speakers off, I swore I could still hear it, faint and distant. I left everything running and went into the break room to collect myself. I poured a cup of coffee, hands shaking so hard I nearly spilled it. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my landlord. "Hey, just checking in. Did you hear anything weird at the house earlier?" Carol downstairs said she heard footsteps again. I stared at the message, my heart sinking. Again, I started typing back when another text came through. "Don't go back there tonight." I blinked at the screen. "What do you mean?" I typed. No response. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the flickering fluorescent light above me, trying to decide if I should just leave. It was almost 4 a.m. anyway. That's when I heard the booth door slam. I sprinted down the hall. The on-air light was glowing red, and the muffled sound of static came from inside. I pushed open the door and froze. The chair at the console was spinning slowly, like someone had just stood up from it. The mic was live, and through the headset I could hear faint whispers, overlapping voices, like a dozen people murmuring at once. I reached to cut the feed, but the computer froze. The whispers grew louder, rising into a distorted chorus that made my stomach twist. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The screen flickered once, then displayed a single line of text in the center. "He's inside." The power went out. For a second, the only sound was the hum of the backup generator trying to kick in. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard a door creak open. The hallway was pitch black. My phone flashlight barely cut through it, the beam jittering from my shaking hand. I walked slowly toward the sound, calling out, "Who's there?" No answer. When I reached the far end of the corridor, I realized the back exit door, the one that led to the lot, was open. The wind howled through it, scattering papers across the floor. I stepped closer, shining the light toward the door. And that's when I saw him. A man, standing just outside the threshold, tall, wearing what looked like a long, dark coat. His face was pale, his eyes reflecting the beam of my phone like animal eyes. "Who are you?" I managed to say. He didn't answer, just lifted his hand and pointed past me down the hall. I turned instinctively and froze. At the other end of the hall stood something small. A child. Barefoot, its head tilted slightly, just like the figure in the cornfield. The man at the door whispered something I couldn't hear. Then the lights came back on. The hallway was empty. The door was closed. I stood there for a long time, my ears ringing, before finally gathering my stuff and locking up early. I left the station lights on and drove home, my heart still pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The drive back was quiet, too quiet. The streets were deserted, the houses dark. When I pulled into my driveway, the upstairs light in my apartment was on. I hadn't left it on. I sat in the car for a long minute, watching the window. Nothing moved, no shadows passed. Finally, I forced myself to go inside. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I checked each room, everything seemed normal, but when I reached the bedroom, I noticed something on the window. A single foggy handprint. Small. I stood there staring at it until my phone buzzed again. A new message. From my landlord. "Sorry, meant to text sooner. The guy who used to live in your unit, he died there about 10 years ago. Halloween night. Worked at that same radio station. Heart attack, they said. But he always told people he saw something out there first, something that came to the window. My stomach dropped. Then the phone vibrated again. Another text. You left your lights on. I can see you through the window. I froze. That didn't make sense. My landlord lived across town. Slowly, I turned toward the window. Someone was standing outside. Same tall figure from the station. He was staring up at me through the glass, his head tilted, a faint smile curling on his lips. And beside him, holding his hand, was a small child. Barefoot. The lights flickered. My phone slipped from my hand. When they came back on, the window was empty. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, jumpy at every sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard faint knocking, soft, rhythmic, coming from somewhere above. The attic. I never went up to check. A week later, I quit my job at WBLM, packed up, and moved out of that apartment. The landlord didn't ask questions. Carol downstairs told me she'd been hearing those footsteps again lately, though. Last Halloween, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo, grainy, black and white, like it came from an old camera. It was me, sitting in the radio booth, and behind me, through the glass, a tall figure was standing. Story. The end. It started the week before Halloween. I had just moved into a small rental house in the outskirts of a quiet American town, the kind of place where the streets were lined with aging maple trees, and every yard had a couple of pumpkins and fake cobwebs strung along the porch lights. I wasn't used to living alone yet. My last apartment had been downtown, surrounded by neighbors you could almost hear through the walls. Here it was different. Too quiet, especially at night. The first night I noticed it, I was driving home from my shift at the diner around 11:30 p.m. The roads were empty, leaves swirling in the headlights as the wind blew. That's when I saw him. A man walking along the side of the road, dressed in a long dark coat, his face obscured by some kind of mask. It looked like a cheap Halloween mask, pale, featureless, vaguely human. At first, I thought it was someone out for a late-night stroll, but there was something wrong about the way he stood, the way he tilted his head to watch me drive past. I slowed down just a little, keeping an eye on him through the windshield. He didn't move. He didn't wave or acknowledge me. He just stared, or at least I think he did, behind that mask. My stomach twisted, and I drove on faster than I should have, convincing myself it was just some Halloween prank. The next night, he was back. Same spot, same coat, same mask. I was unnerved but tried to ignore it. I mentioned it to my neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Harper, who had lived on the street for over 20 years. She frowned when I told her. Maple Hollow has its quirks, she said, her voice low. People say the roads get haunted around Halloween. Kids go out and scare each other. Don't pay it any mind. I nodded, but I didn't feel reassured. I knew the streets. I'd driven them all day. There weren't usually any pedestrians at that hour, let alone someone standing like that in the dark. Over the next few nights, I saw him more and more. Sometimes he was closer to my house, sometimes farther down the road. Each time he just stood there, unmoving, head tilting slowly as if following me. I started locking all the doors and windows at night, checking the yard from every angle. Sometimes I'd see the faint glow of his eyes behind the mask when the porch lights flickered, or I'd catch a flash of the long coat disappearing behind a tree. I tried telling myself it was a prank, or a stranger lost, or just my imagination. But on Halloween night, it became impossible to ignore. I was coming home from work around 1 a.m., the streets nearly empty, when I saw him again. Only this time he was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. My heart was hammering in my chest. He didn't move. I considered honking, but something in the way he was positioned stopped me. Then he lifted his arm and pointed directly at me. Not a wave, not a gesture. It was just a deliberate, slow point. I swerved and drove past, adrenaline flooding my veins. In the rearview mirror, I watched him disappear into the shadows. When I got home, I double-checked every lock. My living room windows had locks, my door had deadbolts, but I felt vulnerable, like someone was inside my house already, just waiting. I tried to sleep, but the quiet was broken by a tapping sound on my window. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was a branch, or maybe an animal, but the taps were regular, deliberate. My breath caught as I pulled the curtain back just enough to see him standing there. Masked, dark coat, head tilted. He didn't move. He just stood there. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering that someone was outside. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. Footprints led back toward the woods, but there was no one else there. The following days, strange things started happening around the house. The porch light would shatter on its own. The gate to the backyard would be open when I was sure I'd locked it. Footsteps creaked across the floor at night when I was alone. I even woke up once to the sound of the front doorknob turning slowly. Then came the pumpkin. I found it on my porch one morning, a black pumpkin with a candle burning inside. Stuck in the top was a small note, yellowed, smoky. Written on it were the words, "You should have stopped." I called the police again. They came, took the pumpkin, and told me it was probably a prank, someone trying to scare me. I didn't believe them. I began staying awake most nights, watching every shadow. 2 nights later, I found another note. "I saw you again." This time, it was weighted down with a small rock, sitting in the same spot the first note had been. I decided I couldn't stay there. I packed a few things and went to a motel. When I returned a few days later, the house seemed normal, quiet, but my front door had a key on the table. My own key, bent slightly. Under it was another note, "You shouldn't have left." I called Mrs. Harper, and she told me to talk to Sheriff Dalton. At the station, I explained everything. He listened carefully, then said something chilling. There had been other reports over many years of a figure matching my description. Same mask, same coat, appearing around Halloween. People would see him on roads, near houses, sometimes leaving notes. No one ever caught him, and some of the people who reported him moved away afterward. I installed security cameras. The footage showed him again, on the front porch, whispering something I could barely hear. "I found you." I packed up and left the house for good. I moved to another state, tried to forget it, but last Halloween I saw him again. Different town, different streets, but same coat, same mask. That night, on my porch, a black pumpkin awaited me, and inside a note, "You can't leave." Story the end. It was late October in the small Appalachian town of Ravensbrück, Kentucky. The fog had rolled in thick that evening, curling around streetlights and making the town's empty sidewalks appear endless. Halloween was underway, but the energy that usually filled the town, the excited screams of children, the laughter of neighbors, was absent in the older part of Ravensbrück. The houses there had long since been abandoned, their windows shattered or boarded, paint flaking in the damp air. Local teenagers whispered stories about these houses, about the strange noises that came from inside, and about the disappearances that had never been explained. 17-year-old Ethan had always been drawn to those stories. He was tall and wiry, with a restless energy that made him an insatiable seeker of dares and thrills. That Halloween, he had convinced his 2 closest friends, Mia and Lucas, to join him on what he called the ultimate Halloween adventure, spending the night inside the old Whitmore mansion at the edge of town. The mansion had been abandoned since the 1970s, and stories claimed the Whitmore family had vanished without a trace, leaving their possessions behind. Rumors of strange noises, apparitions, and even bloodstains made the mansion infamous among local kids. As they approached the mansion, Ethan felt the familiar thrill of fear mixed with excitement. The front gate was rusted and chained, but a portion had broken, just enough for them to slip through. Fog clung to their shoes as they crossed the long, overgrown driveway, and the mansion loomed in front of them like a dark sentinel. Its windows were black holes, some boarded, some shattered, and the peeling paint gave the impression of decay frozen in time. "Are we seriously doing this?" Mia whispered, clutching her backpack. Lucas shrugged, trying to act brave. "We came here for the thrill. No turning back now." Ethan grinned. "Exactly. Halloween only comes once a year. Let's see what the Whitmore house has to offer." They stepped inside. The air was thick with mildew and dust, a sharp, metallic tang lingering in their nostrils. Floorboards groaned beneath their weight, and their flashlights cut through the heavy darkness, illuminating broken furniture, shredded curtains, and debris strewn across the floor. The silence was absolute, save for the occasional creak of the house settling. "Man, this place is something else," Lucas said. Ethan nodded, scanning the room. "Let's check upstairs." The staircase was narrow, wooden, and groaned under each step. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling in long strips, and strange dark stains marred the surfaces. The hallway was long and claustrophobic, doors on either side slightly ajar. In one room, Ethan saw a crib, dust-covered and rotting, with a small yellow doll lying in it. Its glass eyes reflected the flashlight beam, staring at him in a way that made his stomach twist. "Creepy," Mia whispered. "We shouldn't be here." Ethan waved her off. "It's just old stuff. Nothing's going to happen." But as they moved deeper into the house, the temperature dropped noticeably, their breath fogging in the cold air. Then came the whispers. At first faint, almost imperceptible, they grew louder. "Don't leave. Stay. Forever." Mia's eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" Lucas laughed nervously. "It's just the wind. Old houses make weird noises." Ethan wasn't so sure. He felt a presence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on like invisible hands. Shadows moved at the edges of his vision, stretching and twisting unnaturally. He turned, expecting to see one of his friends, but the hallway was empty. Suddenly, a door slammed shut somewhere in the house. The sound echoed, reverberating through the halls, and the whispering intensified. Overlapping voices now. "Come back! Join us! Stay with us!" Panic surged. Mia grabbed Ethan's arm. "We need to leave. Now!" They turned to go, but the layout of the house had changed. The staircase they had used was gone, replaced by a solid wall. Hallways looped in impossible angles, doors led into walls, and windows opened onto more rooms instead of the outside. It became clear they were trapped. Then they saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows, tall, thin, pale, hollow-eyed, moving silently, yet somehow exuding intent. Ethan could feel them watching, waiting, their presence suffocating. The whispers grew into shouting, overlapping, chaotic, demanding, "Stay, forever. Join us." Mia screamed as a cold skeletal hand brushed against her shoulder, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Lucas tried to swing a flashlight toward a figure, but it dissolved into darkness before his light touched it. The house seemed alive, twisting and turning to confound their escape, closing doors in their faces and stretching hallways impossibly long. Ethan stumbled into a room at the end of a hall, its walls lined with mirrors. In the reflections, they didn't see themselves. Instead, dozens of figures stared back at them, hollow-eyed and twisted, their faces contorted in silent screams. One figure stepped closer in the mirror, while Ethan, paralyzed with fear, could not move. Its hands pressed against the glass from the other side, reaching toward him, scraping along the mirrored surface. "Ethan!" Mia screamed, shaking him. He jerked awake from the trance-like stare into the mirrors, only to find the hands had disappeared, the figures gone. The room was empty, but the house still pulsed with an oppressive energy, a living darkness that seemed to close in on them. They fled, sprinting blindly through hallways that bent impossibly until they found a window that led outside. They climbed through, falling into the cold night air, gasping for breath. The mansion loomed behind them, dark and silent again, as though nothing had occurred. For the rest of the night, they ran through the foggy streets, not stopping until they reached the more populated parts of town. When they finally dared to look back, the mansion was there, silent, untouched, its windows dark and empty. In the following weeks, the terror did not fade. Ethan began hearing whispers in the night, shadows flickering at the edges of his vision. Objects moved slightly when no one was around. His reflection sometimes lingered, smiling when he did not. Mia and Lucas reported similar experiences, hollow figures appearing in mirrors, voices calling their names, handprints appearing where none should exist. Even months later, Ethan could not shake the feeling of being watched. Halloween, once a night of fun, had become a reminder that some places are not meant to be entered. Some doors, once opened, never close. Some reflections, once glimpsed, follow you forever. And the Whitmore mansion, though miles away, had not forgotten them. Story the end. It was the last week of October in 2016 when everything strange started happening on Sycamore Drive, a quiet suburban street in upstate New York. The kind of place where neighbors waved while mowing their lawns, kids played basketball in driveways, and Halloween decorations started going up by mid-month. Plastic skeletons, fake cobwebs, glowing pumpkins, the usual suburban charm. But that year, something was off, even before the 31st arrived. I was renting the upstairs half of a duplex with my girlfriend Jenna. We'd moved in a few months earlier after leaving our cramped apartment in Albany. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful, and our landlord, Mr. Robbins, lived downstairs. He was in his late 60s, retired, friendly enough, though there was something quietly peculiar about him. He had a habit of standing in his front yard after dark, just staring across the street, motionless for minutes at a time. Jenna said he was probably just lonely. I wasn't sure. On October 25th, we started noticing little things. The first was the sound of footsteps on the stairs outside our door late at night. It was around 12:30 a.m. when I heard it. Slow, careful steps, one at a time. I thought maybe Mr. Robbins needed something, so I opened the door, but there was no one there. Just the cool autumn air drifting up the stairwell and the faint rustle of dry leaves. When I mentioned it to Jenna the next morning, she said she'd heard it too, 2 nights earlier, but thought it was me coming in late from work. That same day, while taking out the trash, I noticed something strange across the street. There was a scarecrow propped up on the front lawn of the Miller family's house, but it wasn't one I'd seen before. It looked disturbingly lifelike. Its clothes were dirty and old, like its head tilted slightly forward as though sagging under its own weight. I figured the Millers were just getting into the Halloween spirit. But the next morning, the scarecrow was gone. When I asked Jenna about it, she shrugged. Maybe they took it inside. It was supposed to rain. That night, though, while she was in the shower, I caught sight of something through the upstairs window. The scarecrow was standing across the street again, only this time it wasn't in the Millers' yard. It was in ours, near the edge of the driveway facing our house. I ran outside, heart pounding, expecting to find a prankster. But the yard was empty. Only the cool air, the faint smell of wet leaves, and silence. I didn't tell Jenna about that part. I just double-checked that the door was locked and tried to brush it off as imagination. The following evening, October 27th, the doorbell rang just after sunset. Jenna opened it before I could stop her. On the porch stood 3 kids in cheap Halloween costumes, a skeleton, a witch, and a vampire, holding pillowcases. "Trick or treat," they yelled. She laughed and apologized, saying Halloween wasn't until Monday. The kids looked confused for a second. Then one of them, the skeleton, said, "He told us to come tonight." Jenna smiled awkwardly. "Who told you that?" The boy pointed across the street. "The man in the pumpkin mask." Jenna and I both turned our heads, but the street was empty. The kids giggled and ran off into the dusk. That night, neither of us could sleep. Around midnight, the footsteps came again. This time, louder, quicker. I threw open the door immediately, but again, nothing. The sound had stopped the moment the door opened. I leaned over the railing and looked down the stairs. Something caught my eye near the base of the steps, a small orange pumpkin. I picked it up. It wasn't carved, just sitting there, perfectly round. But on the bottom, in black marker, someone had written, "Halloween is every night." I brought it inside, thinking it had to be some kind of sick prank. Jenna didn't find it funny either. When I showed it to Mr. Robbins the next morning, he looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You should throw that away. Don't keep anything that doesn't belong to you." I laughed nervously. "It's just a pumpkin." His eyes didn't leave mine. "No, it's not." He went back inside before I could ask what he meant. That night, something woke me around 2:30 a.m., the sound of whispering outside the window. Not voices exactly, but a soft, raspy murmuring, almost like leaves scraping against glass. When I looked, I saw something move in the yard. There by the street stood the scarecrow again. But it wasn't standing still. It was swaying, back and forth, like it was breathing. The motion was so subtle, I almost convinced myself it was just the wind. Then I saw the head slowly lift. The face, or where the face should have been, turned up toward our window. I yanked the curtain shut, my heart slamming against my ribs. Jenna stirred beside me. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer. I just whispered, "Don't look outside." The next morning, the scarecrow was gone again. We called the Millers to ask if it was theirs, but they said they'd never had one. In fact, they were staying with relatives for the week. Their house was completely empty. That evening, I came home to find Mr. Robbins standing in the driveway, looking more nervous than usual. His eyes darted toward me. "You saw it, didn't you?" I hesitated. "Saw what?" "The thing in the yard." I swallowed hard. "You mean the scarecrow?" He shook his head slowly. "That's not what it is." I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "Lock your doors on Halloween. Don't answer anyone after dark." Then he turned and walked back into his apartment. Jenna thought he was losing it. I wasn't so sure anymore. By the 30th, the neighborhood started to feel different, quieter. The wind seemed colder, sharper. Fewer kids were out playing. Decorations that had looked cheerful a week ago now seemed menacing. Hollow-eyed pumpkins, plastic tombstones, hanging ghosts fluttering in the dusk. That night, while Jenna was asleep, I checked the door cameras we'd installed a month earlier. I fast-forwarded through the footage from the past few nights. At first, it was normal. Cars passing, leaves blowing, neighbors walking dogs. But around 2:17 a.m., 2 nights before, the motion sensor activated. The screen flickered, and then I saw it, a tall figure in the yard. It looked like the scarecrow, but it moved. It walked slowly toward the porch, then stopped at the bottom step. It stayed there for several minutes, head tilted up at the door. Then, without turning, it walked backward into the street until it vanished into the dark. I couldn't breathe watching it. The next morning, October 31st, I told Jenna everything. She wanted to call the police, but what would we even tell them? That a scarecrow was stalking us? By evening, kids were out in costumes, laughter echoing through the street. For a few hours, it felt normal again. We handed out candy, trying to enjoy it. But around 9 p.m., the trick-or-treaters thinned out. The street quieted. That's when we heard the knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks on the door. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. Jenna whispered, "Maybe it's the kids again." Then came another set of knocks, louder this time, shaking the door. I flicked on the porch light and opened the door. The scarecrow stood at the bottom of the stairs. Up close, it wasn't made of straw at all. Its skin looked leathery and pale, its clothes torn and filthy. The smell was awful, like rot and damp earth. The head was a burlap sack tied with twine, but under it I could see the faint outline of a face pressing against the fabric. I slammed the door and locked it, dragging Jenna away from it. She was shaking. We called 911, but by the time officers arrived, 15 minutes later, the yard was empty. They searched around and found nothing. The only thing they pointed out was a set of muddy footprints, bare feet, leading from the street to the porch and then back toward the woods. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat on the couch until sunrise, the lights on, listening to every creak and rustle. The next morning, Mr. Robbins didn't come out of his apartment. By noon, police cars were out front again. Someone had found him, dead. They said it looked like a heart attack, but the way the officer said it made me think there was more to it. A few days later, when we were packing to leave, I went downstairs one last time. Mr. Robbins's door was open, and one of the officers let me inside briefly to collect our shared mail. The apartment was small and smelled faintly of mildew. In his living room, there was a table covered in newspaper clippings and old photographs, all of them about disappearances in the area. The most recent one was from the late 1970s. Every single article mentioned the same date, October 31st. In the center of the table was a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of Polaroid photos, old, yellowed, but clear enough to see what was in them. Each one showed a figure dressed like a scarecrow, standing in different yards around town, sometimes alone, sometimes next to houses that looked eerily familiar. The last photo was dated 2015, and it was our house. I left everything there and got out. Jenna and I moved back to Albany that week. For months, we tried not to talk about it, but sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that photo, about how our house looked in it, about how the scarecrow stood in the yard, head tilted just like the night I saw it. A year later, Halloween rolled around again. Jenna was working late, and I was home alone. I turned off the porch light, didn't open the door for anyone. Still, around midnight, I thought I heard something outside, soft footsteps, one at a time, coming up the walkway. I didn't look. When Jenna came home, she found something on the porch, a small uncarved pumpkin. On the bottom, in black marker, were the words, "Halloween is every night." I threw it away, but the next morning, there was another one. Story, the end. The Halloween air in Cedarville was thick with fog that rolled off the river and through the narrow streets of the old town. It was a small, almost forgotten place in northern Ohio, the kind of town that had more legends than people, where every Halloween night carried the weight of 1,000 whispered stories. I had grown up hearing them, listening to the older kids at school talk about haunted houses, disappearances, and shadows that moved on their own. But I'd never experienced anything truly frightening until the Halloween of my 17th year, a night that would haunt me for decades. I had recently gotten my driver's license, and with it came the freedom to explore more of Cedarville and the surrounding countryside. My friends, Matt, Lisa, and my younger sister Hannah, all insisted that this year we should do something different, something daring. Instead of the usual trick-or-treating, we decided to visit the old Granger farm, a property abandoned for over 30 years, sitting at the edge of town past the train tracks. Everyone said it was haunted, but the stories were always vague. Kids went in, never came back, or the house cries at night. Nobody seemed to know exactly why the farm was considered cursed. We packed into my car around 9 p.m., the streets unusually empty except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant honk of a car horn. My heart pounded with the kind of excitement that only comes when fear is combined with the thrill of rebellion. Matt, always the daring one, took the passenger seat and started explaining the legends as if he were reading from a script. The Granger family disappeared one Halloween night in 1987. The farmhouse had been left as it was, dishes still on the table, lights flickering sometimes, even without power. Rumors claimed that the family hadn't left. They were trapped inside somehow in the shadows of the house. Lisa shivered in the back seat. "You're creeping me out," she said. "I don't want to go. Why can't we just stay in town?" Hannah, only 13, clung to my arm. "I don't like this. Something's wrong about this place," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I tried to brush it off. "It's just an old house. We'll look around, get some pictures, maybe a few spooky videos, and leave. That's it." By the time we reached the Granger farm, the fog had thickened to the point where the surrounding trees were barely visible. The house itself loomed out of the mist like a shadow. It was a large 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and windows that glowed faintly, not with light, but with reflection, the kind that makes you feel watched. The yard was overgrown, weeds crawling over broken fences, and the remnants of what looked like a swing set leaned crookedly to one side. A single oak tree stood near the house, its bare branches clawing at the sky. Matt jumped out of the car immediately. "Let's do this! The best stories are inside the house!" Lisa shook her head but followed anyway, flashlight in hand. Hannah hesitated, but I convinced her to come with me. We stepped onto the porch, and the floorboards groaned ominously under our weight. The door was slightly ajar, and when I pushed it, it made a long, hollow creak before finally giving way. Inside, the air smelled of mold, dust, and something metallic I couldn't identify. The house was much larger than it appeared outside. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and broken furniture was scattered around like the remnants of a storm. On the staircase, I noticed muddy footprints leading to the second floor. Fresh footprints. My stomach tightened. "Okay, that's weird," I whispered, pointing them out. Matt laughed nervously. "Probably some kids earlier. Let's check upstairs." I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. As we climbed the stairs, the air grew colder. It wasn't just the temperature dropping. It felt like the cold seeped into my bones, a biting, unnatural chill. Each step creaked loudly, echoing through the house. When we reached the second floor, the hallway stretched far beyond what I expected. Doors on either side were closed, and at the end a faint light flickered. "What is that?" Lisa asked. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaky. We moved toward the light. As we got closer, I realized it was coming from a room at the far end of the hall. The door was partially open, and inside was what looked like a living room, frozen in time. A small fire burned in the fireplace, even though there was no woodpile nearby. Dust motes danced in the flickering light, but the room was otherwise empty, except for the family portrait on the wall. It was a photograph, faded but clear enough to make out 4 faces, a mother, father, and 2 children, smiling stiffly at the camera. The uncanny part was the way the shadows in the room seemed to cling unnaturally to the figures in the photograph. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks, but then I noticed movement, or what looked like movement, in the shadows. They stretched and twisted independently of the figures, like something alive hiding just behind them. Matt stepped forward. "It's just the shadows, right?" Before I could answer, a soft whisper filled the room. "Leave now." We all froze. The voice was faint, almost like a sigh, but unmistakably human. Hannah grabbed my arm, trembling. I told you something was wrong. Lisa's flashlight flickered, then died completely, plunging us into darkness. My heart raced. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. Then, from somewhere behind us, the whispering started again, overlapping now with several voices. Go, don't, stay. I turned, trying to find the source. There was nothing visible, just the faint orange glow from the fire and the oppressive darkness surrounding us. Then I noticed movement in the corners of my vision, shadows that darted across the walls faster than anything human could move. Run! I shouted. We bolted down the hallway, stumbling over debris. The staircase loomed in front of us, and as we descended, the floorboards groaned louder than ever. From somewhere above, I heard a door slam, and then laughter, childlike but distorted, echoing unnaturally through the house. Outside, the fog had thickened further. The yard looked even more alien, twisted by shadows and moonlight. We ran to the car, jumped in, and locked the doors. I tried the ignition, but the engine turned over sluggishly as if resisting. Finally, it roared to life, and we sped down the overgrown driveway, not daring to look back. The next day, I called the local historical society to ask about the Granger farm. They confirmed part of the story. The family had indeed disappeared on Halloween night, 1987. Search parties found the house empty, with no trace of the family. Over the years, trespassers reported strange phenomena, lights, whispers, sudden cold spots, but no definitive explanation. Some locals believed the house was cursed, that something had trapped the family in another dimension, or worse, that the house itself was alive. I tried to dismiss it, but over the next few weeks, I noticed odd occurrences at home. Items would move slightly from where I left them, shadows lingered where none should exist, and on particularly foggy nights, I could hear whispers outside my window. One night, I dreamt of the Granger house, its shadows crawling across the walls, and a voice calling my name. I woke up sweating, heart pounding, and for a few seconds I swore I could see the flicker of a fire in my bedroom, just like the one in the house. Hannah refused to talk about that night for years, and Lisa moved away soon after, saying the town felt wrong. Matt, usually fearless, became quiet and withdrawn, staring at empty corners and muttering about shadows. I tried to convince myself it was all imagination, but deep down, I knew the house had left something with us, some presence that followed long after we escaped. Years later, I returned to Cedarville for a visit. I drove past the Granger farm during the day, expecting to see the decayed house I remembered, but the land was empty. No house, no barn, nothing but overgrown grass and the oak tree. It was as if the house had never existed. My rational mind told me it was a trick of memory, or maybe someone had finally torn it down. But as I drove past, I caught a glimpse of movement among the trees, a shadow that seemed taller than any human, standing perfectly still, watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. And though decades have passed, I still remember that Halloween night, the whispers, the shadows, and the feeling that whatever haunted the Granger farm didn't stay behind in the house. It followed us, patient, unseen, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. Even now, every Halloween when the fog rolls in and the wind carries the scent of fallen leaves, I think of the house, the family, and the shadows. I think of the voices that told us to leave and how lucky we were to escape. And I know, deep down, that the Granger farm is still out there somewhere, waiting, watching, and never truly empty. Story the end.